Dear guests, dear online guests, people who are pleased to welcome you on behalf of the Klingendahl Institute, on behalf of the The Hague Center for Strategic Studies, and on behalf of the Bosnia angles all are very knowledgeable about historic and current day events in Bosnia, in the country. So I will not speak for too long, but I do want to take a moment and reflect on the fact that today is exactly 30 years ago that the Dayton Agreement was signed at the Wright-Patterson Air Force Base in the United States. And I'm really glad that we have a meaningful opportunity today to revisit some of the developments that happened since, so in those past 30 years, but also to consider together, and hopefully with some optimism, the opportunities and challenges that lie ahead for Bosnia and Herzegovina. Now, of course, we'll speak about Bosnia's EU accession path, the Dayton constitutional arrangements, the stability in the country, big geopolitical dynamics, etc. These kind of big topics, let's put it like that. But also let's talk about civic engagement, about community resilience, and about democratic change. I will hand over shortly to Sajla Agacic and Alden Per from the Dutch Bosnian think tank for their opening remarks. We'll then be glad to welcome Ambassador Almir Savovic from Bosnia and Herzegovina to the stage for his keynote address. And then we have two exciting panels for you, which we will properly introduce at their start. Followed by a concluding keynote by Ambassador Henk van der Dol, who came in from Sarajevo here to the Netherlands. And thank you also for coming to join us here at Klingendahl. I'd like to remind everyone that our conference is held on the record. We have a live stream on YouTube, so anything you say can be used against you, just to be sure. Let me just finish with a big thank you to everyone who helped in making this conference happen, the teams at the three organizing institutions, and I'd like to hand over to Sila and Alden. Thank you.
Wouter, thank you as well for everything that you did to make this possible. Dear attendees, Your Excellencies, academia, members of civil society, and students. My name is Alden Per. I'm a board member of the Dutch Bosnian think tank here in the Netherlands, and I would like to welcome you on behalf of our organization to this beautiful location today. As a think tank, we are committed, among other things, to achieving the integration of Bosnia and Herzegovina into the European Union. Although Bosnia and Herzegovina is considered one of the oldest states on the European continent, we would like it's one of the oldest countries, as I said, but what we would like to achieve is EU membership as well. However, this ambition must be understood within the current political, social, and constitutional context in which Bosnia and Herzegovina finds itself. At the end of 1995, an end was put to the enormous aggression and bloodshed in Bosnia and Herzegovina, which resulted in more than 100,000 dead citizens, war crimes, crimes against humanity, and the genocide in Srebrenica. Under great pressure of the international community, especially the United States, the Dayton Peace Agreement was signed between Bosnia and Herzegovina, the Republic of Croatia, and the Republic of Serbia as the successor of the Federal Republic of Yugoslavia. The treaty achieved its primary goal, stopping the brutal aggression against Bosnia and Herzegovina as such. It also confirmed the historical continuity, sovereignty, the territorial integrity, and political independence of Bosnia and Herzegovina. However, at the same time, the state was given a new internal structure. That was the direct result of the aforementioned atrocities. Although there are concerns about the legal validity of the peace agreement in the context of the Vienna Convention on the law of international treaties, especially in the context of the Articles 51, 52, and 53, we do not wish to emphasize that aspect of the Dayton Peace Agreement today. However, we would like to point out that there is a book free of charge here in the main hall that deals with this subject. So we would like to recommend you to read this book, and if you wish to explore this independently for yourself. The treaty was intended as a floor, not as a ceiling. It was intended to evolve gradually with the ultimate goal of a democratic Bosnia and Herzegovina that would be independently capable of realizing its European ambitions. Over the past 3 decades, it has become clear that this development cannot take place without struggle and interventions of the High Representatives, as it is completely hampered by the inhibiting mechanisms which are an integral part of the treaty and the constitution, as we know it today. What do I mean by that? To start with, the various types of ethnic and entity vetoes that have been used, some would say misused or abused, to slow or block completely the Bosnian European ambitions. Further, lower levels of power have continuously worked on undermining the state level, with often corrupt politicians promoting the interests of other countries instead of those of Bosnia and Herzegovina, thus undermining the further democratic development and European ambitions of Bosnia and Herzegovina. The purpose of this conference is to jointly examine the past 3 decades and reflect on what Dayton has brought to Bosnia and Herzegovina, where it has hindered Bosnia and Herzegovina, and how we can transit from the still ongoing Dayton phase to the Brussels phase, in which Bosnia and Herzegovina will have to take the final steps towards a full membership of the European Union. My colleague, Sheila Akagic, will address you on that level. Thank you.
Good morning all. Thank you very much Alden, Wouter and distinguished guests and friends today. Like you, I extend our warm words of welcome to everyone present here today in the room and also via the live stream. We would also like to thank our co-organizers, the Klingendahl Institute and The Hague Strategic Studies, for a very fruitful cooperation for approximately 6 months leading up to today. So my name is Sheila Akagic and I'm one of the founding members of our Dutch, Bosnian Dutch BIG-NL think tank, which was established less than a year ago. In addition to everything that will be discussed today and that has been said about Dayton in the past, I would like to turn the spotlight on one almost forgotten group in all these conversations. I'm referring to the citizens of Bosnia and Herzegovina, more particularly its youth in Bosnia and all over the world. They are the reason we want to establish a new organization that is our BNL think tank today. Let me take you a few years back when I myself and a couple of my founding members, which are in the room today, decided to come together and start this organization. We were not all that young, but still young enough to realize that our voices were not being heard and reflected enough in public debates. Many of us, like myself, were born in Bosnia and Herzegovina, so I know my age, but grew up elsewhere, for example, here in the Netherlands. Hence, different and multiple societies shaped our views and perspectives, as well as our intellectual power and our ability to add new insights into discussions about the future of both our native country and our new home countries. We read the newspapers, followed and finished our education in different European countries, followed national and global politics, and realized that no one really spoke our language. Not in the native country of Bosnia anymore, but also not in the Netherlands or elsewhere. We realized that we would have to organize ourselves in order to be seen, to have our voices heard, and to be taken into account. As we often hear, youth of today is very much influenced by the internet, by social media, sometimes dubious sources of information. We wanted to contribute to factual analysis, to grounded and well-argumented and fact-based papers. And as the cherry on the cake, we wanted to organize events like this one. We also wanted to instigate discussions that would go beyond different entities, beyond different religions, if any, and focus on an ordinary person, a citizen, people like us wanting to make something of their lives. Students who study law, for example, and dream of their country being the full member of the member state of the European Union. These are key, yet often forgotten stakeholders in the future of Bosnia and Herzegovina. In the end, the history of the whole Western Balkans is scarred by nationalism. And unfortunately, we see its rise in the European Union today. That makes it important to look at what the lessons we can learn from the Western Balkans might be, evaluate what errors we should try to avoid in the future, and what positive elements could be used to strengthen both the European Union itself, its security, in the current turbulent geopolitical times. So let's delve together into what I hope you will find to be the very well organized panels today, and make this a day filled with curiosity and interaction. That was our intention a couple of years back when we first started planning this conference. Let's hear different and diverse views and voices and try and identify potential path forward for Bosnia and Herzegovina together with the European states in the heart of Europe as it has been for centuries. Thank you. And now I have the honor to give the floor to His Excellency, the Ambassador of Bosnia and Herzegovina to the Netherlands, Mr. Almir Shahid.
Ambassadors, dear colleague, Ambassador of the Netherlands in Bosnia and Herzegovina, dear members of Bosnia and Herzegovina Dutch think tank, dear members and friends from the regional institutes, dear friends, ladies and gentlemen, it's really my honor to be here today with you to exchange a little bit about this 30th anniversary of the signing of the Dayton Peace Agreement. 30 years ago, in November 1985, the signing of the Dayton Peace Agreement put an end to the war in my homeland, Bosnia and Herzegovina, and opened the road towards peace, reconstruction, and reconciliation. It gave Bosnia and Herzegovina a chance to rise from ashes of war and to start rebuilding our institutions, our economy, and what was also very important, especially at that moment, the confidence among our citizens. The Dayton Peace Agreement also provided a framework that allowed for the return of refugees and displaced persons, for the reconstructions of our houses, of the infrastructure, and also a kind of a gradual normalization of the life throughout the whole of Bosnia and Herzegovina. Of course, we all know that the Dayton Peace Agreement has introduced a very complicated and delicate constitutional system in our country. As we all know, as a matter of fact, our constitution is just one of its annexes, more precisely the Annex 4 of Dayton Peace Agreement. This is a constitution which made our decision-making very difficult, sometimes very slow, a constitution which institutionalized, we could say, a kind of ethnical divisions in our society, but also a constitution which is full of contradictions. Why I'm telling it? Because if you are looking at our constitution is telling that all most important international instruments for the protection of human rights represent an integral part of our constitutional order. But in the same time, several provisions of our constitution itself are completely contrary, for example, with the European Convention of Human Rights. And this is one of the reasons why, since 2010, the European Court of Human Rights in Strasbourg brought several judgments against Bosnia and Herzegovina. The most famous is Sejdić-Finci case against Bosnia and Herzegovina, asking Bosnia and Herzegovina to adopt several provisions of our constitution with the European Convention of Human Rights. Yet, I think it is very important to remember that the main objective of the authors of the Dayton Peace Agreement was not to design an ideal constitution. Their main objective was to do what was the most needed at that time. It was to stop the war in Bosnia and Herzegovina. And also to provide our country with a, I would say, constitutional framework which may evolve with the time through reforms and through its adaptation with our priorities and aspirations. Unfortunately, up to now, we have never managed to have the necessary majority in the parliament to do it. Of course, we should have done it, but as I said, up to now, it wasn't possible to do it. So even today, 30 years after the signing of the Dayton Peace Agreement, our country continues to function under its Dayton Constitution. Nevertheless, in spite of all those challenges that we have been facing every day, we can also tell that Bosnia and Herzegovina has achieved, and I would say, incredible journey since 1995. From a completely destroyed countries, we have become a quite dynamic, maybe one of the most dynamic economies in our region. From a war-torn society, we have become a country which contributes every day to the international peace and security by sending our soldiers. Since 2005, it means for more than 2 decades, to the different international peacekeeping and peace-making missions throughout the world. We are also trying to be as much as possible active actor in the international relations, especially in the multilateral organizations. For example, amongst other things, we successfully served as a non-permanent member of the UN Security Council. We had a very successful chairmanship of the Committee of Ministers of the Council of Europe. We are chairing and coordinating different regional Southeastern Europe and Western Balkans organizations on the regular basis. And also we are trying to be active in all other international multilateral organizations. For example, here in The Hague, since November 24, we have the honor to chair for the first time in our history the Conference of the State Party, the General Conference, 193 member states of the Organization for the Prohibition of the Chemical Weapons, OPCW, etc. Looking ahead, our priorities remain very clear. The European Union and the NATO. Last year, we got, I could call it even a historical decision by the EU concerning the opening of the accession negotiations with Bosnia and Herzegovina, and I would like to use this opportunity also to thank very much our Dutch friend for their support concerning that decision in March 24 in Brussels. Now we are about to fulfill still remaining 2 free requirements in order to have finally our first intergovernmental conference and to start to negotiate the first chapters. Our advancement in the direction of the Euro-Atlantic integrations is, I would say, without any doubt, the best guarantee that the darkest moments of our history, of our recent history, will never be repeated. Integrations for us mean stability, security, progress, and I would say also a kind of a shared future with the other like-minded countries in the world on the basis of the democracy, human rights, and rule of law. Today, when we are marking 30th anniversary of the Dayton Peace Agreement, my opinion is that we should not see it only through its prism of its shortcomings. We have to see it also as something which stopped the war. It's something which was a very important foundation upon which the peace was built, and the peace which allowed Bosnia and Herzegovina to make progress that we have achieved today. Of course, we all agree that we should have changed, reformed our constitution up to now in order to make it much more in conformity with our aspirations, with our priorities, etc. But unfortunately, we haven't managed to do it. Therefore, while we continue to seek the broad consensus for our constitutional reforms that we really need very badly, I think in the same time we have also to find ways to accelerate our progress, within the existing constitutional framework, and especially concerning speeding up of the implementation of our 2 main priorities, which are, as I said during my speech, the EU and the NATO. And I think this is definitely the best, maybe very simple way to finally pass from Dayton to the Brussels phase. Thank you very much once again, and I wish you very, very successful conference. Thank you.
All right. Thanks a lot, Mr. Ambassador, for your speech, for your open speech about Bosnia's, the legacy of Dayton, Bosnia today, and the ambitions for the future. Let's move to the first panel, 30 years of peace, 30 years of deadlock. What has Dayton delivered and what comes next? And in a minute, I'll call our panelists to the stage. But let me shortly introduce the topics we'd like to discuss in this first panel, which are first to look back at the legacy of the Dayton Agreement, analyzing the achievements but also the challenges that remain in the country. Second, the imperatives and possibilities for reforming the Dayton constitutional framework. Third, the role of the international community in present-day Bosnia, including through the Office for the High Representative. And fourth, the EU's role vis-à-vis Bosnia and Herzegovina. And I'm glad to invite to the stage an excellent panel to discuss these questions with you. So let me first welcome to the stage Professor Tineke Strik. Please, a warm applause. Member of the European Parliament with the Greens. Thank you. Great. Thank you for coming. Please take whatever seat you like. You're a member of the European Parliament with the Greens European Free Alliance group since 2019. And before that, you were already, amongst other things, a member of the Senate here in the Netherlands for the Green Left. And in the European Parliament, Tineke Strik is a member of the LIBE Committee, Civil Liberties, Justice and Home Affairs, and vice chair for the European Parliament delegation for the relations with Bosnia and Herzegovina, including the EU Bosnia and Herzegovina Stabilization and Association Parliamentary Committee. Okay, wow, this is challenging. So you're a very active voice on Bosnia in the EU institutions, so very happy to have you. Thank you for coming. Okay. I'd also like to welcome to the stage Professor Maja Sajic. So, I feel some distance between us somehow, but okay. Of course, yeah. So Maja Sajic is a professor of constitutional law at the School of Law and researcher at the Montagne Center for Rule of Law and Administration of Justice at Utrecht University. You participated a lot yourself in these constitutional reform discussions in Bosnia, and you just published a new book, or your work? All right, so there is a book, and we can talk about it. And well, at Utrecht University, well, I got this from your profile. It says a lot. You research multi-level governance, dynamic legitimacy, dynamic stability, asymmetries, constitutional values and principles, rule of law, authoritarianism, anti-democratic risks caused by technology, alternative conflict solutions, power shifts, and constitutionalism under extreme measures. Well, wow. Let's try to discuss as much as that today. So thanks a lot for coming. Third, we have all the way from Los Angeles, we have Dr. Jasmin Mujanovic. Please welcome to the stage. And yeah, great. Finally, someone in my corner. Yeah. And thanks a lot for taking the time and effort to join us here in The Hague today. Jasmin Mujanovic is a senior non-resident fellow at the Western Balkans Center at the New Lines Institute for Strategy and Policy. Previously, you were connected, amongst other things, to Freedom House and the Friedrich Ebert Stiftung. And, well, you're a long-time and well-respected analyst on Bosnian affairs, having written multiple books on the country, including Hunger and Fury, The Crisis of Democracy in the Balkans, and another book, a more recent book, The Bosniaks Nationhood After Genocide. So thanks a lot for coming. Welcome. And then last but certainly not least, I'd like to call to the stage Dr. Robert Goren. Please. From the Ministry of Defense here in the Netherlands, thank you for being here today. And Robert Goren is a senior advisor, military strategy at the Military Strategy Directorate of the Dutch Ministry of Defense. And at this Ministry of Defense, Robert, you had a long-standing career. Among other positions, you worked for U4 as a staff officer and acting deputy chief of information operations. And I believe also in your current position, you're very much focused still on regional dynamics in Southeast Europe and in Bosnia specifically. So thank you for being here today. Now, just some very short housekeeping rules. I'd like to give each speaker about 7 minutes of time for their opening remarks. I will be strict on time. Thereafter, we will move relatively quickly to the Q&A, so please already think of your questions. I'm afraid that for our viewers on the live stream, we do not have a possibility to ask questions, so there's a real responsibility here with the people in the room to ask any good question you can think of. Well, somehow you're sitting in the right order, because I'd like to start with you, Jasmin, on my direct left, and ask you a bit to reflect on, well, what has been achieved with the Dayton Peace Agreement, what challenges remain after 30 years. Could you say a few words about the legacy of the whole agreement? Thank you.
Thank you very much for having me. It's a great honor. I'm always pleased to be in the Netherlands. Bosnia and Herzegovina and the Netherlands have a very special relationship. It is, of course, rooted in some very painful experiences, but I'm always very sort of heartened and gladdened by the fact that the relationship has continued to evolve. And in particular, thank you to the Bosnian Dutch think tank for having us here. That's an example of that kind of evolution that I think really should be celebrated. Dayton has two bodies, right? To use a slightly medieval terminology, the king's two bodies. We have Dayton as the peace agreement, which is arguably the most successful peace agreement in modern political history. we have Dayton as the Constitution, which is a deeply dysfunctional, illiberal, unrepresentative, unaccountable, and untransparent document that has very much slowed and complicated Bosnia and Herzegovina's both European and Atlantic aspirations. I think it's interesting that this year in particular, and at the risk of sounding slightly conspiratorial, I think it was ultimately an accident of history, that we ended up with two significant developments that showed both how close Bosnia is to very meaningful progress and change, and also why those prospects still remain frustratingly quite distant. We had two significant developments this year. We had the appeals process of the so-called Kovacevic decision at the European Court of Human Rights. The decision was initially accepted and ruled upon by the courts favorably by the appellant Slaven Kovacevic. And those of you who took the time, for instance, to read that decision would have seen that the court took a very robust and I think very democratic view of the need for constitutional change in Bosnia and Herzegovina, and quite unequivocally said that the idea of centering ethnicity as the exclusive modus for political representation in Bosnia and Herzegovina was not in keeping with the European Convention on Human Rights, and ultimately, indirectly, also obviously with the EU acquis, which is to say, Bosnia and Herzegovina, if it is to be an EU member state, if it is to be a NATO member state, must go through constitutional reform that is in line with the normative and legal architecture of those two organizations. Unfortunately, that decision was ultimately overruled on an appeal in the Grand Chamber, although it has to be said that the appeal was largely on technical grounds, in fact, exclusively on technical grounds. It was very frustrating the way in which, unfortunately, the current occupant of the office of the High Representative involved himself in that case. It was very unfortunate how a number of neighboring states, first and foremost Croatia, involved themselves in that case. And then we had another major development this year, of course, and that was ultimately the rulings and conviction of the Bosnian Serb secessionist, Mr. Milorad Dodik, who was ultimately removed from the office of President of the Republika Srpska entity. That was an unprecedented development in Bosnia and Herzegovina, at least from a political standpoint. I mean, other political officials have been removed, but Dodik was this kind of, entity unto himself, no pun intended. And so seeing him removed from political power by the courts, on the one hand, demonstrated significant institutional capacity on the part of the Bosnian state. What was again very frustrating is that in the subsequent political developments, political actors within the region, within Europe, and obviously within BiH itself, prevented Mr. Dodik's political party from ultimately being ejected from their current place in the governing coalition. And again, a number of European states finally took the step of imposing entry bans on Mr. Dodik. Unfortunately, we were not able to get EU-level sanctions against Mr. Dodik, in particular owing to his friends in Budapest, but again, unfortunately, also due to some of the decisions or views that were prevalent in Zagreb, but there it is. So all of this is to say that there is the possibility, because history keeps moving forward. For instance, had the Kovacevic decision ultimately not been overruled, that would have created a significant legal normative architecture for moving the process of constitutional reform forward in Bosnia and Herzegovina. Had Mr. Dodik's party been ejected from the state-level government, we would have had a much more constructive set of political actors in power, including from the RS entity, because the opposition parties in the RS, with whom I disagree on a great many things, to be clear, but they have taken actually a very pragmatic view to some of these major political debates in Bosnia and Herzegovina. I don't want to say too much more than that, but I will just say that in fact, as a kind of closing point to this introductory remark, is just to say that this entire incident, or incidents over the past, say, 12 or 18 months, I think shows very clearly why so many of us continue to remain involved in attempting to push forward the reform conversation in Bosnia. Because on the one hand, it seems so close and so possible. And then on the other hand, it is continuously frustrated by these kind of deus ex machina developments that I do think ultimately can be dealt with, but that does require both a shall we say, domestic political willingness, but also a international, and I think specifically European political willingness.
Thanks a lot, Jasmine. Can I ask you two very short follow-up questions? So basically about current events. One of them would be Mr. Dodik has been removed in a way from his active political position, but what role will he still play in the country in the time to come? If your estimations on that, and connected to that, there's elections this Sunday, right? The presidential elections for Republika Srpska president. So what are your expectations there? Will we see? Are we seeing a real competition there with the opposition that you already mentioned having a chance, for example, or?
I mean, the latter question is easier to answer. No, I don't think it's a real competition, partly because it's a captured electoral system, right? I mean, it's just not actually free and fair. We saw that during the last general elections in Bosnia, in the RS entity, because we had to do a rerun of the elections for the position of the president of the entity. Also, it has to be said that the opposition parties took a political calculus this time around and decided ultimately not to run their best candidates, because there's going to be general elections in pretty much a year, right? So I think we'll see a much more open competition there. So unfortunately, I expect actually that the SNSD will win on Sunday. I never quite like to do prognosis of that sort, but that ultimately is my sort of expectation. I'm sorry, remind me of the first question. This is jet
about
lag.
Mr. Dodik himself and whether he will still have what role he will still play in
yes, jet lag is wonderful. So here's the thing: the shoe for which we're waiting to see whether it's going to drop is going to be the further decisions of the Bosnian court authorities as to whether or not Mr. Dodik can continue to be leader of the SNSD party. If he continues to be leader of the SNSD party, he will continue to be a very, very significant political figure in Bosnia and Herzegovina, arguably the most significant political figure. If he is removed from that position, then we could see some fairly significant developments, I think, in very rapid order. I think it's very clear that there's a competition underfoot within the party itself between Ms. Željka Cvijanović and Mr. Dodik's son, Igor Dodik, as to who is going to take over the party. It's very clear that the United States and some other international states have sort of tried to tip the scales a little bit, one way or another. But ultimately, it will depend on whether he is party leader. And I only say that just to kind of give you context. We have had other major political figures either lose elections in dramatic fashion, as happened to Mr. Izetbegović at the last general elections. We have had other political figures removed from office. But when they remain as leaders of their party, they continue to be able to still dominating the political process, because in some ways that's where the real power is.
Thanks a lot, and let's zoom in a bit more on the constitutional framework. Maya Sajic, I'd like to turn to you. I hope there's a microphone there. Could you say a few words about, well, the constitutional framework as an obstacle to change, basically? Because as we heard the ambassador saying, on the one hand, there is a clear hope that and a clear need, as we've seen with the European Court of Human Rights decisions, that the constitutional framework should be changed. On the other hand, the ambassador also spoke of a hope to still accelerate EU process, NATO process and relations in the current situation with the current constitutional framework. So what are your ideas about that? Do you see any realistic pathways for constitutional reform in the current day context? Please, the floor is yours.
Yeah, thank you very much for that question. Well, I have to be realistic, like JLo, right? Let's be real about it. I think one major, or maybe the first major challenge that Bosnia and Herzegovina faces has actually started with the Venice Commission report in 2005. And this year is actually the year of several round anniversaries. 30 years of genocide, 30 years of Dayton Peace Agreement, but also 20 years of the Venice Commission opinion. Because the Venice Commission opinion provided us with some roadmap, technically, for domestically driven constitutional change. It gave us or presented us with concerns about discrimination, about unequal voting rights on one side, and on the other side about structural problems with the Dayton Peace Constitution, such as extensive and over-paralyzing use of ethnic vetoes. On the other side, I think the second major challenge is something that Yasmin already mentioned, and that challenge is actually related to the Sejdić and Finci, and then the lineup of those judgments. I often hear that the main issue in Bosnia and Herzegovina is actually that Bosnia and Herzegovina is ethnic, and then consequentially, there's a territorial division, that there's ethnic but also territorial division. However, I do believe that the core constitutional challenge in Bosnia and Herzegovina does not stem from the mere existence of the ethnic parties or the strong ethnic collectivities. These identities are deeply rooted, they exist, they are real, and they also translate into political structures. However, I do think that the problem is actually overcoming discriminatory structures that have relied on the combination of the actors. And most notably, we also relied on the European Court of Human Rights to actually address those issues, starting with Sejdić and Finci and so on. I have to say that Kovačević case, yeah, there is this element for sure, but how I see it as a constitutional lawyer, I see that Kovačević case actually provided us with this structural limitation even more clearly, sort of to say, because the applicant framed his case as a part of a broader push to transform Bosnia and Herzegovina from this ethnic parity model into something civic, into this statewide democracy, and so on. So proposing to remove every ethnic parity model into, as I said, a civic type of a state. So even an abolition of the House of People and so on. Given the potential consequences for the European Court of Human Rights community, I never thought it was a possibility, actually. And it makes sense because, for me, it was unsurprising that the Grand Chamber actually walked it back. Because if we take into consideration that we still have Belgium, that we still have Cyprus, and so on, and other countries that are deeply divided, and so on, insisting on what Kovačević insisted on, I never thought it was actually bound to success, because the court also had to strike the balance for other states within its community. And so I think in sum, Kovačević actually reinforced, the court's deference to the constitutional logic of those complex or divided democracies. And this judicial restraint, in my opinion, combined with this domestic political resistance, underscores actually why constitutional reform in Bosnia and Herzegovina remains, well, possible in theory, but profoundly very difficult actually in practice, because the constitutional framework itself is protected not only internally, but also, as we see now, externally by the European Court of Human Rights. I think the third major challenge is actually the missed opportunities. And we've had many. If I talk to my colleagues who are also constitutional lawyers from Bosnia and Herzegovina, we cannot necessarily agree about the moment where, the exact moment where we hit the tip of the iceberg. But we do agree, most of us agree that it was the April package which actually fell through. Most of us agree about this. Some others have different dates in mind. Because the April package actually sought to operationalize this Venice Commission opinion and effort. And then at the very end, I think the final major challenge actually concerns this international dimension in Bosnia and Herzegovina, not from the outside, but from the inside, particularly this expansive role of the OHR. Because originally we see OHR as a supporting role to unblock the progress when it's needed, but at the same time, there is a democratic deficit, right? So we're kind of walking on a very thin line, not being able to see when is it democratic deficit and when is it when we actually do need OHR to do it. And I think that PIC in its initial time, PIC actually thought that the OHR would be some kind of, that there would be a gradual transition.
PIC, the Peace Implementation Council. Yeah.
Yes, Peace Implementation Council, towards this genuine ownership. I think with the last, and probably some of you will not agree, but I think what Schmidt did good, I think that despite this democratic deficit, throughout the past 2 years, Schmidt made changes, for example, to the criminal law, to the electoral law, that actually enabled the local institutions to act in the case of Dodik. It created the conditions for the institutions to actually act. And of course, I said, I know that most of you possibly will not agree, but at the time when those changes were happening, I remember I was saying, together with my colleague Leila Balic from the University of Sarajevo, this is what is going to happen, and nobody believed. And then when it started happening, of course, it was clumsy. We did not see it through in a very nice way, right? But at the same time, it was the first time when the local institutions actually took over and they tried to do something about it. I'll stop here because I think my 7 minutes is...
Perhaps also for you, very short follow-up question then, because this final point, does that mean then that you would say that, well, that what the ambassador also mentioned, that perhaps some positive changes, etc., are still also possible under the current constitutional system? Can Bosnia make some progress on the EU path, on NATO path whatsoever, while struggling with the constitutional questions?
I do think it's possible. There is, the question is, how do we go from Venice to Brussels? I don't think it's from Dayton to Brussels. I think it's from Venice to Brussels, actually.
All right.
So yeah.
At least the destination. We're agreeing on the destination here. Yeah.
So at least something has changed, right? Well, I think there is possibility, but when I was younger, when I was a younger scholar, I thought that there would be a possibility for a general overhaul. Right now, I do think that a major overhaul of the Constitution is highly unlikely. And I think it's also highly unlikely that we will see constitutional amendments in the foreseeable future. I do think that there's something else that we can do without the Constitution in place, and that is mechanisms of coordination. That is something that I was thinking about quite a long time, and we've seen these things happening. At the state level, we've seen examples also at the entity level, and when we say, yes, the police reform actually did not succeed, yes, it did not succeed, but we did actually see establishment of the agencies, of the coordination mechanism that actually enable the police coordination between the entities, for example. We've also seen, of course, coordination is quite rudimentary in Bosnia and Herzegovina, but there's a potential to do that. We've seen, for example, during the floods, it failed epically. It did not work well. But of course, it failed because
this was
2014.
2014, yeah.
It was because of the communication, not because there was no coordination, for example, potential in place. During the pandemic, it started and then it fell through. So it seems that it needs to be exercised in a specific way in order to be learned, sort of to say. So I see potential, for example, in coordination because coordination and communication connects levels, connects groups, creates trust between levels, between groups, and as such, it creates also solidarity. And solidarity also means a little bit more stability. It means understanding that there could be fair management in the system, no overpowering. So in that sense, I think we should be thinking along those lines.
Somehow it doesn't sound like the most appealing thing, like mechanisms of coordination.
Exactly.
Perhaps we should come up with a somewhat more striking term, but it
Yeah.
sounds like a very meaningful thing to do indeed. Robert, let's turn to you. We've talked a lot now about the legal situation and about the constitutional situation. I'd also like to focus a bit more in the second part of our panel on the security and the political situation in Bosnia. And Robert, perhaps you can also, you're working here at the Netherlands Ministry of Defense. Perhaps you can tell us about how the Netherlands assesses that stability situation in Bosnia and Herzegovina, whether there's here a sort of a sense whether, because we hear sometimes in the debates here in the Netherlands that stability or security even in Bosnia may really be under threat. I'm looking forward to hear your assessment, but also what the Netherlands itself is doing via the European Union, via NATO, to also help to raise stability or maintain stability in the country. So please, the floor is yours.
Yes, thank you very much, Wouter. First of all, I'd like to thank the organization for inviting us here. It's well appreciated. And second, yes, my angle is slightly different from the previous speakers. It's security and geopolitics that are my main domain. So it's not the legal side, but it's another aspect of the Dayton Peace Agreement. Again, it's been mentioned by previous speakers, Dayton brought an end to the war, and the war was horrible and gruesome. And there was a general sense of relief inside Bosnia and in the rest of the world that the war had come to an end. So that's the major achievement of Dayton that we should not forget. And the war was, by all accounts, gruesome. What we also should remember that the Dayton Peace Agreement was the outcome of what happened in the military domain as well. In the month of August 1995, there was a large-scale offensive by forces from the government in Sarajevo together with Croatian forces, which pushed back the Bosnian Serb forces in the direction of Banja Luka. And that created the conditions on the battlefield which could lead to negotiations. Before that, the incentive, especially for the Bosnian Serb political leadership, to start negotiations was very limited. But the situation on the battlefield, the changed strategic positions between the parties, gave an opening for negotiations to begin, together with the huge international pressure, especially from the Americans, to find an end to this war. The other thing I would like to bring back is that Dayton initiated the implementation force, the military force, which was responsible for implementing the military side of the peace agreement. And in the beginning, there were more than 60,000 international troops present in Bosnia to make sure that this peace agreement would actually last, that it would not be, the fighting would not resume, and that all warring parties would remain committed to the peaceful conditions. And with hindsight, that always seems more or less self-evident, but at the time, I remember speaking to some of my colleagues who were actually there. It was not self-evident. We knew that the signatures were there on paper, but these were three armies who had been fighting each other for more than 3 years in the field and who were now asked to lay down their weapons, to follow the instructions from international military forces, and to accept an inter-ethnic boundary line which did not follow the front line of the troops. So there had to be a lot of troops placements and displacements to make sure that the Dayton Peace Agreement could actually be carried out. Of course, the implementation force lasted only for 1 year. It was followed by the stabilization force S4, which could reduce the level of troops from 60,000 to 30,000. And throughout the years afterwards, it was brought down to about 7,000 troops in 2004, when U4 took over the responsibility of S4. Again, that was an important step as well, because now the European community, for the first time, became instrumental in maintaining peace and stability in Bosnia. For the European Union, this was a major step in developing the instrument which was part of their foreign and security policy. So from that angle, Bosnia was also very important because UFO was the beginning of many developments in this military domain. EUFOR was further reduced until in 2012 there were only 600 military left in Bosnia, and the military value of that mission became much less important than before. And it was assumed that EUFOR could more or less develop into an advisory mission for the armed forces of Bosnia and Herzegovina. Building up the armed forces was also a major part of the international military commitment. And it has been mentioned by the previous speaker that the armed forces of Bosnia and Herzegovina now contributed to peacekeeping operations around the world. They are a professional military organization. They are one of the main instruments of the central state of Bosnia and Herzegovina. And as such, they're well appreciated by their NATO and EU partners within Bosnia and abroad. Having said that, how is this security situation? I'd like to borrow a phrase which is often used by EUFOR commanders who describe the situation of the security situation as stable but fragile. I think that's a very good phrase, stable but fragile, to characterize the situation. It's stable because there are no indications that the present security is under threat by parties who want to return to an armed conflict. I think that idea is not really there. On the other hand, it's fragile, but the fragility is not a military, it's a political fragility which influences the security situation as well. Well, you asked how we, from the Netherlands, see our contribution. We take part in EUFOR. We contribute at this moment with an infantry unit to the main battalion of EUFOR. We provide staff officers at the EUFOR headquarters in Camp Butmir, Sarajevo, and we have a human intelligence team on the ground with analysts in EUFOR headquarters. And that's because the Netherlands is committed to the stability and security of Bosnia. We think that the presence of EUFOR helps to create a safe and secure environment for the people of Bosnia, and it provides a precondition for political and constitutional developments. Security is the basis from which the other developments can take place. At the same time, EUFOR is now back to a strength of more than 1,600 troops. So it has been reinforced in recent years for two developments. One is the aggression of Russia against Ukraine, and the other, the occasional lack of stability within Bosnia itself due to political circumstances. So in March this year, EUFOR commander activated part of the reserve forces to have a stronger presence on the ground, to make sure that he was giving the right signal of European commitment to safety and stability in Bosnia. So the Netherlands is in line with the European and the international community in its commitment to security in Bosnia. But we also see that it's not all foreign countries are committed in this very same way. We notice that, for instance, Russia is now acting in a much more unfriendly way by using the separatist activities of Republican Serbia, especially Mr. Dodik, as a pawn in Russia's fight against the West and the rivalry with the West. So Russia acts much more as a spoiler now than it did many years ago, when it contributed to the peace in Bosnia as well. The situation has changed dramatically since 2022. And we are very concerned about the disinformation campaigns that Russia started, Russian investments in various companies in the Republic of Srpska, financial support, and of course, this is not something we would like to see. Russia does not want Bosnia to be part of the Euro-Atlantic community. So it works against those objectives, whereas we very much would like to see Bosnia to become part of the Euro-Atlantic community. There are other countries who also play a role and not always contributing to the stability of Bosnia. From a geopolitical point of view, Bosnia can be described as a contested space. It's where the West, where Russia.
We need to think of some microphone stands for the next event.
And of course, neighboring countries play a role as well. And we would like to see all neighboring countries to play a positive role in Bosnia. But we cannot take that for granted. Some of their activities undermine the progress Bosnia can make in the direction of integration within the Euro-Atlantic community. So that's a problem there. We see China becoming more active, first from an economic point of view, then from a political point of view. But we see also intelligence activities from China, because they show a certain interest in the way Western military operate and function within Bosnia. We see other countries play a certain role, but not to undermine stability or to prevent the integration of Bosnia. But, they all have a different role to play. If Bosnia is part of this, our Euro-Atlantic community, the role of foreign players can be much more restricted than it is now. So that's something we look forward to. And that's why we as the Netherlands would like to keep our commitment to the security of Bosnia. And that's why we provide troops. We've been providing troops around the world, but in the last few years our focus is entirely on the Eastern Front, on reinforcing NATO, on building up our own armed forces. But contributing to security in Bosnia is still very much part of our outlook. I think I would leave it with that.
Thanks a lot, Robert. I'd like to turn to Tineke Strik now with a difficult task, because we talked about the legal situation, we've talked about security, and now it will be up to you in a way to combine all these elements also with the political layer, the international layer, and the role of the European Union in Bosnia. And I noted in one of your speeches in the European Parliament, you noted earlier this year that the international community, especially the European Union, must act to help the country, Bosnia, to overcome division and let Bosnia prosper as an inclusive and real democracy, and of course as an EU member state. So my question related to that would be, you're saying the EU must do that. Isn't it already doing these kind of things? Isn't it already trying to support the country to become an EU member state? Please, and your reflections on everything that has been said are very welcome as well.
Is it on? Yeah. Well, thanks a lot first of all for inviting me to this distinguished panel, but also to this celebration of 30 years Dayton. Let's see if it's a reason for celebration or not, but I'm really happy that you have this think tank in the Netherlands and that you're so active and visible, and I really love to cooperate with you. And also happy to share my thoughts. And indeed, after these excellent contributions, we need to look at the policymakers, but because the policymakers, they have to make it possible and have to take the right direction. And I think that there a lot needs to be improved and changed because I have the feeling that there's a growing disconnect actually between the society of Bosnia and Herzegovina, where people just want to live in a politically stable country, which works on more prosperity, progress, with more safety and possibilities for the young people. And you don't see that reflected in the positions of the main political leaders. And I think there, I really miss a sense of urgency because while this is happening for quite a long time already, young people, skilled people, they leave. And I think not only because of a lack of economic perspective, but also given the whole situation that is stalled and the feeling that they cannot develop a good future in this system, this political captured systems of party politics and corruption, nepotism, whatever. And I think that the EU should be much more aware of that, because what I see so far is that the EU keeps on focusing on those political leaders to change things. And to, of course, they have to do that, nevertheless, because they are the one in power. But then we really have to look genuinely, are these political leaders willing and interested going indeed from Dayton to Brussels, or do they have their own interest in a status quo? And if the latter is the case, the EU should become more strategically effective, I think. What I see now, for instance, also with Dodik, I think the EU should have been much more strong in denouncing the behavior of Dodik, also even before the constitutional judgment, by denouncing, by imposing sanctions, by making very clear that he went too far. He was a real threat for the territorial and political integrity. And when the Constitutional Court of Judgments was there, the EU was not really proactively trying to enforce or to let the judgment being enforced. When I was there in Sarajevo, when this was all discussed, it was also clear that also from the EU delegation there was a lot of hesitation regarding, for instance, the use of EUFOR in order to not to do the arrest, but to stay ready and to make sure to the police of Bosnia, you can do it because we are there to secure the safety. And there are just a few examples, but I think there are many where you can say the EU should have taken side of those who want to reform instead of keep on, let's say, appeasing those who are in power. And that would mean, I think the EU has a lot of possibilities to do so, especially if the accession treaty, the negotiations start, it should really use its leverage to be much more strict and clear on what it requires from Bosnia to get chapters opened, and the constitutional reform should be definitely one of them. And maybe in stages, I don't know, I really understand it's a very complex situation, but we cannot let the situation continue that there's a huge gap between the European Court on Human Rights case law, despite the last one of the Grand Chamber. Still, all the others, they stand. The impediments in the current system. Also to make sure that this crucial step towards democracy is being made, but also the fight against corruption, the judicial system, the fundamental rights, which are also very much under threat. They should be really at the core and they have the priority in the negotiations by the EU. And the use of conditionality also in the funding should be much more visible. This last example, for instance, of approval of the growth plan, of course, it's wonderful that, you know, in the end, there was a possibility to fund the country, but there was a very grave violation of the obligation to consult civil society, for instance, and local communities. And yeah, then
did not happen, or no?
It did not happen.
Oh.
No, it did not happen. And I asked this week to the DG to the Secretary General of the DG, and he said, "Yeah, we will try to repair that one way or the other while implementing." You know, this is not very strong.
Obligatory.
Yes.
It's a sort of an obligatory.
Yeah.
Process.
I mean, how
side.
serious are you in your own requirements? Yeah. And then I think, so we should be much more vocal, and not only the EU, but also the member states. And I must really give a compliment to our own Dutch ambassador, because he is the one who is vocal. But when I was there also, I noticed that the others stayed silent, and then afterwards come to Mr. Van Doorn saying, "Look, happy that you raised these issues." That should not be, he should be supported. The EU member states should be aligned, and that's another thing which is really problematic. The behavior and the interest of some of the member states, of course. And everyone knows here in the room, I'm talking about Croatia and Hungary specifically. And the Commission is also listening to them too much. And so the EU should much more work on making clear to them that it's not about bilateral or individual interest, it's about the interest of a smooth and proper merits-based accession process. And therefore, of course, we should work towards lifting the vetoes in all those interim steps of the enlargement, but also in all those, every political decision, this influence plays a big role, and the EU should not let themselves being hijacked in that way. And that's also my last remark for the European Parliament. So far, we are luckily quite united in our national reports, in our recommendations, in our actions. I'm really happy with that, because there's also a lot of threat inside the European Parliament as well, with a few very influential actors trying every time to pollute the process. But so far, I think we managed to have good reports and common actions. And I think that's vital. And now it's up to the Commission to listen to that direction that that both society and international community should want.
Perhaps a very short follow-up question, because I'm always wondering what is keeping the EU from being more proactive on the constitutional reforms, on the conditionality. Is that the internal divides between the member states, or is it also a sort of a general fear, perhaps, of that any change, constitutional change, for example, would at least temporarily affect stability situation, for example? What is your estimation there?
Yeah, what you often hear is the latter argument, like, oh, but then, there might be a further escalation and crisis mode. But actually, in my view, you are now fostering this crisis mode by not acting. Sometimes it may hurt a little bit, but then maybe at least something can change. And in this way, you foster this threat also. So it's successful. It pays out to threat because you're listened to and you're appeased. And that's the completely wrong signal that has been given. Now, also with the constitutional thinking, what I hear too often is, why should we not indeed adopt the Belgian model, for instance, go to more regionalization? And I really think that would be the beginning of further segregation and maybe falling apart. Because at the moment that you start to think about three entities, sort of, or regions, there will definitely be a demand of more transfer of power to those regions, and it's not an incentive or it's not a guarantee at all that it would create also more effective state-level policy making.
Thanks a lot. Yasmin, I've seen you nodding your head in different directions. Is there anything you'd shortly like to and then we'll turn to the audience, so please have your questions ready, but perhaps a very short, if there's anything you want to respond on, if it's working, otherwise I'll give you mine.
I've been clutching it.
Let's switch.
I think all of the comments that were actually very well taken, but I wanted to pull out something that I believe Maya said, and it was sort of replicated to one extent or another in very different ways by all of the speakers. And it's this idea of external protection, although I interpreted it actually not in a particularly sympathetic way. I think, and I thank Tineke very much, because I think she's absolutely right, that I think unfortunately the international community and the European Union in particular has found itself in a very problematic role, in the sense that it has often found itself in the position of reinforcing the worst behaviors of local political actors in Bosnia and Herzegovina. I've often said this, and it sounds like a joke, but I've come to the point where I genuinely have begun to believe it. I don't know if there's some kind of miasma hanging over Bosnia in the airspace, that in the Netherlands or in Germany and in France and Italy, you're a good liberal advocating for the constitutional rule of law, transparency, accountability, and then you land in Bosnia as a European Union diplomat or a diplomat of your own country, and suddenly you're like, you know what, segregated schools, this is good. Yeah, we should.
But then this is not affecting our Dutch ambassador, apparently.
Not at all,
so,
not at all. No. And this is why, but this is exactly the point that I wanted to make. There is consistency in the Dutch position and in the ambassador's position in particular, which is exactly what we need to hear from our other colleagues in the EU and other European capitals, which is, and it's also the thing that Bosnians themselves, that is the public, want. And this cuts across ethnic lines. If it's good enough for the Netherlands, it's good enough for Bosnia. Meaning, rule of law, accountability, transparency. We don't want you to lower your standards. Raise them. Raise them. And say, we want you to ask of us to live up to these standards. And the fact that that has not happened, I think, is just a downward cycle. Because here's the thing, and this is what I want to end on. Here's the thing about sitting across the table from Dragan Čović, Milorad Dodik, Bakir Izetbegović, and unfortunately, increasingly also Viktor Orban, Andrej Plenković, etc., etc. They have been doing this game a lot longer than you have. And they're going to wait you out every single time. And when you get to the point where you say, all right, fine, what do you want? It's over. The game is over. You've lost. So what you actually need to say is no. You need to keep saying no. And if they say, well, tough noogies, then you say, fine, no more money. And now you wait. And I guarantee you, once the money stops, the song will change as well.
This is the idea of the growth plan, of course, with the financial conditionality. But okay, let's turn to the audience. I think we need to borrow one microphone to some, so the audience can have a role. I really want to give the Croatian ambassador the opportunity to shortly respond, but please, ambassador, please do keep it short. Your country has been mentioned, so it's fair to give you the opportunity.
Not only my country, my prime minister, and I think that the role of any ambassador in any country is to defend its elected officials.
Please, let's do short comments and then questions.
Yeah,
please.
I completely disagree with what was said, and I didn't think that we would go that far and apportioning any blame to Andrej Plenković. He does not fit into category with Viktor Orban, at least. So when we are discussing the Bosnia and Herzegovina and Dayton, this is not the first event this year. There have been plenty of follow-up events, and I had an opportunity to get acquainted with the views of some of the speakers here, so I'm not surprised. First of all, I thank you because you are, Robert, from MOD. The situation is really stable but fragile, and you know it very well. Among the countries who are like spoilers there, you didn't mention, or I didn't hear, maybe many Arab countries as well, not only China. This is a very vicious presence as well, the countries that come with a lot of money and are influencing people in local communities. Secondly, there have been a mentioning of this European Court of Human Rights and Kovacevic, and this is a sour grape, so to say. And surprising to many of the actors in Bosnia and Herzegovina came the decision of an appeals chamber. Some of the politicians in Bosnia and Herzegovina, in particular a president who is a part-time Croat, went that far and said that Croats bribed the court, the judges themselves, to enter into this kind of a thinking and adopt this decision. This is ridiculous. You live with the court's judgments when they appeal to your liking and when they are falling well into a narrative or not. So this is I think that the public here does not know. These are particularities of this decision. Kovacevic's decision is important because it has established that a representation, political representation, has to be linked with the voters in any way. So I would like to argue with this. Other than that, you are, Yasmin, you are in a great country. The country in which you have to learn that you agree even with you disagree. This is the country that embraces great many differences. The fact that it is living with the others and is able to live with the others does not mean that people are accepting. But people are constantly trying to work on something, but not in a manner to overpower somebody or dominate over somebody or find fixes. There are no quick fixes. 30 years, the Dayton was meant to stop the war. It stopped the 4 years of a bloody, bloody war, but there were events leading to that, such as Washington agreements between Croats and Muslims, split declaration, And then the armies, this is one of the greatest achievements, Annex II, when the armies were able to work under joint command. Then the people have to learn to accept the others and work slowly toward the mutually accepted agreement. And for us, the most important thing is adequate political representation of the Croats in Bosnia and Herzegovina. The fact that they are the smallest does not mean that anybody can dominate over them.
Thank you very much for your response. Let's collect one or two questions as well and then go back to the panel. I see Mark Duursma here on the third row. NRC newspaper.
Yeah,
just last Monday with Edi Rama, he understood it as anarchy newspaper, but that's not the case. That's not the case.
Yes.
No.
Let's be very clear about that. Yes, it's NRC, just
yes,
an abbreviation
an
of 3 letters. Thank you, Edi Rama. So, my question is for Tineke Strik. You said that there's a growing gap between the sentiment in the population itself and the political leadership, and that the EU should not focus too much on the political leadership, which is often benefiting from maintaining the status quo. And I wonder, what's the alternative? Should that be civil society that EU should be dealing with? And if that's a yes, what is the power of civil society, both on a federal level, on the central level, and lower? Are there really good NGOs the EU should be talking to? That's what
Thanks a lot. This is already alluding a little bit also to our second panel about civic empowerment, etc. But let's also discuss it with these panelists. Is there any other question for now? If not, then let's first move back to the panel. Who would like to go first? Tineke, you'd like to respond immediately? Yeah.
Yeah, thanks for the question. I think that the EU should really think more how to achieve that. First of all, I think it would already help if the EU would be much more vocal and clear, like what is at stake. Because if the citizens start to realize that the current behavior or decision-making by the politicians is not in the interest of accession, is not in the interest of their future, they may be, becoming more critical and vocal and putting more pressure on these politicians as well. And this is why I think we should really make sure that the next elections in October will have some more guarantees of being fair. This integrity package that was imposed by the OHR should be implemented, and the EU could play a very clear role by demanding that this is implemented. So at least give the citizens a chance next time to choose for change, to choose for the European integration. And regarding civil society, like this example, I think with the Grow Plan, make very clear that it's not something nice to have, but necessary for the authorities to do, consulting civil society. And who those organizations are, I mean, it's not on me to decide who should be that one, and I'm looking forward to the next panel indeed. I think there are a lot of very good, capable, transparent organizations that could really help in this participation process and to represent the citizens. And also with funding, of course, really support them with sufficient funding in a transparent way, but they are really the actors, I think, that could help putting pressure on reforms and coming up with better legislation on corruption and fundamental rights, etc.
Perhaps to add one question also for the other panelists, myself, if indeed, because we hear quite reassuring things about citizens and being civic-oriented and who basically want the same things as we want here in the Netherlands, prosperity, democracy, etc. But somehow that's not coming through in the political system. So why do citizens, you're almost saying citizens are not realizing that these politicians are not working in the interest of bringing the country to the EU, but why is the realization not there? I don't know if you want to quickly respond, but otherwise let's also give that question to the other panelists.
You ask me?
If you want to shortly respond, please. Yeah.
I think That's a very I also ask myself that. Don't they see that this is not in their interest? I think it's very difficult to escape the current political system because it's so much, the power is there. And as I referred to nepotism, it's also the whole relations around it. If you want to, if you want to develop yourself and have a role, it's very easy to do that outside of the current political system. So there must be a way to break through that. And therefore, I think we also need constitutional changes. So it's more a matter of forcing them also to open up the system and to contribute to that. But as I said, it's you really must choose the right incentives, because if there's more interest in the status quo, if accession is not the main goal for those politicians, you don't motivate them with accession perspective, then maybe the money would be the best vehicle.
Thank you. Maya, please, you wanted to add?
I just want to intervene briefly because your question and also your answer, well, I have a small criticism for the European delegation in Sarajevo. A couple of years back, for example, they organized the citizens' assemblies around Bosnia and Herzegovina, and they involved citizens from the whole Bosnia and Herzegovina in this pilot project. They invested a lot of money in experts. I also participated with them. We worked together in order to produce, for example, constitutional amendments. And so imagine how people were very enthusiastic about it. And then what happened was a missed opportunity. The opportunity was missed because they came with the document. And then what happened, I can't remember anymore what was it, but it was a budget or something. Amira, do you remember? I have no clue. It was a budget, I think, that was about to be adopted. And the EUD decided to drop the citizens' assemblies. They never published it. They never went through it. So they had a meeting, but that was it. That was it. Wow, exactly, wow. So I think there's also, I mean, if you give people an incentive and then you do not follow through, that also means that you're letting them down. So next time when you organize, for example, something like that, it is very much possible that many of them will not even be part of it, right?
And the document is still there. Yeah. So
it's still there. There's a website. Yeah.
It's still very questionable how that was done.
No, it's not. There is a methodology. There is a methodology. It is developed. It is good.
Our friends on the live stream cannot hear you if you don't have a microphone, so let's stick to the conversations with the mics. I think, Jasmin, you wanted to come in, and Robert, do you also want to respond?
One brief reply.
Okay, let's first go to you then, Robert.
Comments of the Croatian ambassador. I didn't mention the Gulf states or Turkey because I looked at it from a geopolitical angle. Which are the countries that prevent Bosnia from joining the Euro-Atlantic community? And these countries, while they have a financial and economic and cultural influence in Bosnia, all focused on one community, they do not stand in the way of Bosnia's integration in Euro-Atlantic community. So perhaps you differ, but yeah. We don't see that in the same way as other countries influence developments in Bosnia. So that's why I didn't mention them, but we are aware of their role.
Thanks. Robert, if you could hand your mic to Jasmin.
Just very quickly, I sort of feel I have to defend the citizens of Bosnia in a sense. When you look at voting patterns in Bosnia, actually, you see that consistently somewhere in the neighborhood of 20 to 30% of the populace votes for what in any given electoral cycle is presented as reform-oriented political parties. Now, who is reformist in any given cycle has changed, okay. The problem then is what actually happens when it's time to form government. Because of the institutional incentives and structures that exist within the constitutional architecture, it's possible to do two completely contradictory things. One, you can have a very standard parliamentary outcome, which is what we saw, for instance, during the last elections, where the SDA was the biggest vote getter in the country. They won north of 20% of the vote. I think it was around 22% at the national level. But we're not part of the state-level coalition. Totally legitimate.
because there was other political parties that had votes in the parliament. Here's the problem. At the same time, the HDZ, which has never not been part of a state-level government except for about a 2-year period after 2010, where Belgium and Bosnia were competing as to who would go the longest without a national government.
Who won?
I think, yeah, exactly. It depends on how you define winning. Long story short, you have a party that consistently wins less than 9% of the national vote and ends up with 30% plus ministerial seats, sometimes close to 50% ministerial seats. Why? Because you have an upper chamber that is completely artificially gerrymandered to ensure that there is ostensibly ethnic representation, but it's gone so far to the extreme that it completely impedes on basic democratic equality and legitimacy within the parliamentary process. Now, this actually goes back to something that we've been discussing implicitly. I think what's sort of pregnant in this conversation, as it were, is what is Dayton in a chronological sense? If Dayton is the maximum, then probably the Croatian ambassador and some of her colleagues are right, in the sense that we are just going to go further and further to what Tineke was referring to, further and further segregation, which will eventually implode the state, and each Bosnian can become a republic of himself. If Dayton is the starting point, which I think is what the international community intended, then we need to move the conversation forward. And I can say from, I don't want to say from the American perspective in the sense that I'm speaking on behalf of the US government, certainly not, but having had conversations with the American diplomats who were at Dayton, they are all very categorical about the fact that none of them expected that the agreement would survive in the form that it has survived for 30 years. And so at some point, we do have to break the taboo of changing this thing. And I agree with Tineke, maybe it needs to be done in sequence. Maybe we start at some point that's, you know, completely sort of politically anodyne and it doesn't touch anyone's third rail. And okay, sure. I mean, I published a report earlier this year that tried to be as conservative as possible, imagining that. But at some point or another, we need to hear also from our international partners, and this is where I want to stop, that what the public has been saying for many years, which is this cannot go on in perpetuity. This is not acceptable, and it has to change. So let's start changing so that at some point in the future, we can get to actually talking about outcomes that are going to be genuinely representative, genuinely accountable, and also speaking to real-world concerns, like the fact that, for instance, Bosnia and Herzegovina doesn't have a state-level healthcare ministry or a state-level agricultural ministry in a country, an environmental ministry, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera.
I do want to challenge the panel on one topic, and that is this premise that if things remain like this constitutionally, that there is a real chance that the country could fall apart, basically. And I always wonder, like, is the successionist movements that we've seen from Republika Srpska, for example, have they been really sincere? Was there really an objective? Did Milorad Dodik himself really feel that, there's a sort of, there would be a future for Republika Srpska as a separate country almost. Is this really a sincere movement, or is it more of a step to I don't know, disturb the country as such? Because I would perhaps estimate that it would be quite a dangerous thing for a part of the country to actually try and succeed, and then you end up with a very small country which will not be recognized by lots of the international community. So what is the sincerity in those successionist ideas? Does anyone want to reflect on that? I think Maya wants to. And then we'll get back to the audience with more questions, hopefully. Final round.
Well, to be honest, as a constitutional lawyer, I never took it very seriously because it never sounded so serious. It was always a political momentum. So if we go back, for example, from 2018, 2016, can't remember anymore. So if you look at when secession threats came about, it was always because there was a political momentum. So it was always to maximize on some kind of political claims. So I never took it seriously. And I think if you ask my colleagues, because we worked on this project, there's a book, of course, here. As we worked on this project all together, all of the academics from the whole Bosnia and Herzegovina, they repeatedly said, yeah, but there was only one secession threat, one real secession threat. So even for them, they don't even consider that as something very, very, very important. I think the greatest challenge for all of us there is not to eliminate the differences, but how to manage them. That is exactly what we are struggling with. And for each side, I think that is the basic challenge. And the basic challenge for all of us is actually to create channels for dialogue, to create channels to protect this diversity and to ensure the participation. And that is what we're actually struggling with, because we're not used to communication. Our communication is exactly what Dodik does. That is the channel of communication that we are used to. But of course, at the same time, we do not necessarily believe in that.
Thanks a lot. Tineke, shortly.
Well, it's difficult to look into the head of Mr. Dodik. I don't know if I want to, but at least if you look at the rhetorics, there is of course always this reference to the big Serbia, etc., and also it fits very well, of course, with the rhetoric of Vučić. So. What at least it does is increasing the fears, increasing the insecurity of those minorities living in Republika Srpska. So in that sense, it's really devastating, and especially if it's not met with very fierce opposition from the EU or from the state level. It may not be sincere, because I agree with Maya that you also could see it as a way to get certain things done in their own interest, but still it does have an impact. And not only for the insecurity, but also for the perception of Serbian inhabitants of Republika Srpska, thinking that this is the normal road to go, or something that should be supported. At least it undermines the ambition of having one country with all the differences, but at least going into that direction of more integrity. So therefore, it should really be treated as a threat, whether it's genuine or not.
Thanks. Let's go back to the audience. Are there any other questions? I see Nikkei Wendholt all the way in the back. And let's take another one. Where about? Yeah, okay, yeah, please. We'll take two at once. Yeah, please.
Thanks so much. My name is Nikkei Wendholt from the University of Humanistic Studies. Thanks a lot to this panel. It was really a breath of fresh air, for your integrity, for your very profound knowledge. Really welcome in topics like these. My invitation to you basically is to expand a little bit upon, especially to you, Tineke Strik, what your call in the European Union means for a country like Serbia. Would you call for the same cooperation with civil society? And what kind of organizations are you thinking of, like RECOM, like Women in Black, perhaps to be a little bit more concrete there? In that same idea, and perhaps it's already a bridge to the next panel, I don't know, but to expand perhaps a little bit upon the student-led protests and what they could mean for the region too. Thanks.
Thanks a lot. And then there was one more question here on my right. Yeah.
Thank you. My name is Lars Bierma, the Hague Academy for Local Governance. I'm curious, and you started referencing it a little bit. We need to move forward. The Constitution stalemate, but this has been the situation for a very long time. We never thought it would last. What is really needed? What are the changes or pushes, incentives that need to happen to actually break through? That's the key question. And then beyond that, do you have ideas of what the next constitutional order could look like? You already started going to, it shouldn't be regionalization, federalization, but what is the vision that or scenarios that you would envision? And I think I don't have a specific person to address this to.
Thanks. Let's go back to the panel. Perhaps, so what local organizations to work with, basically, a question about Serbia and the situation there, and then what specific issues should be pressed on to make constitutional change happen, and what would that constitutional change look like? Maya, can I start with you, and then we go back to Yasmin, and that's then also the final round. So if you have any final comments to make, please do so.
Yeah, I think there are some prerequisites before we even start thinking about, structural, procedural processes and so on. I think there are some prerequisites that we need to think about. And I think one of the prerequisites is something that you mentioned, and that is to strengthen the trust, for example, in the political process. We need active participation of citizens. We need active participation of NGOs. So that needs to come forward. We need to strengthen that. Especially in public debates, that is very much needed in decision-making forums and so on. So citizens and NGOs, they need to be invited actively in those. The other thing I think that what needs to happen is to invite international stakeholders to actually shift their focus from initiating extra institutional decision-making and move back the decision-making to the institutions, because most of the decision-making that is happening right now in Bosnia is actually happening outside of the institutions. So that is something that I think that needs to happen. And then also I think the instruments and mechanisms of sanctions for those representatives who would obstruct or abuse the elements of the system, either structural or procedural. For example, parliamentary attendance, non-attendance, and so on. So that would be, for example, a way to actually create preconditions to, for example, financial penalties and so on. So these are preconditions to actually have people start talking about constitutional reforms. And then after that, how it will look like, I said, possibly coordination. You need to build trust, because there's no trust right now between the parties, between the levels, between the groups, and so on. I see the potential in coordination, and I also see, especially through this project, for example, in this project, what we did the second track diplomacy. That is technically what we did. We built, together with 3 other colleagues, we built an academic platform between several academics from the whole Bosnia and Herzegovina, and we collaborated on creating the first glossary of constitutional terms in Bosnia and Herzegovina. So that means that I was building this particular glossary together with a colleague from Banja Luka, but also from the colleagues from Mostar. And of course, colleagues from Sarajevo were also writing together. It wasn't an easy task, but that is also what we need to do. So we need to create trust between each other in the same way we did, for example, in this particular project. I would expect this also, this level of trust to start to build up between, for example, political parties. And starting with that, we can start talking about constitutional changes. As I said, there shouldn't supposed to be overpowering, there shouldn't supposed to be there should be the idea that there should be, the management of the system should be based on trust, that there wouldn't be overpowering. So
Maya, I'm looking.
Yes,
yep.
I'm sorry.
No worries. It's very interesting. That's the thing. But I have to do some timekeeping here. So thanks a lot, Tineke. Final reflections, and please the questions as well. Serbia.
I mean, my call for more consistency by the EU also applies to Serbia, of course, very clear. I think the EU should have been much more supportive to the students' protests, to the bigger protests and their criticism on the corruption in the government, but also the increasing autocratic level in the Vučić regime. Although we have a new government now, not everything is resolved, that's very clear. They should have been listening more to. I think that the way that the Commission acted also let's say, more cemented also the distrust in the EU, and this was really a big missed opportunity. I think in the previous term, we had Farheli, which was very clearly, almost openly, a fan of Vučić, as an ally, of course, of Hungary. And this was really making a lot of harm. And now it's really up to Kos to actually do the opposite, to really choose side of the civil society. Which organization exactly, this is, I mean, not up to me, but I'm also not knowledgeable enough like saying something, but those who generally represent a certain interest of the civil society should be taken seriously. And so a lot needs to be done there, and also be more openly clear on what is wrong there and what should be changed in order to have any possible progress in the negotiation process.
Thank you.
Maybe just finally,
Final thought.
because these things that what should be changed, I think Maya already said a few very important things. It's of course the one man, one vote principle being much more clearly implemented, and also do away with a lot of vetoes, which also really impedes a normal democratic process. But let me say just one thing to conclude. It sounds all quite pessimistic, and I don't want us to leave with this pessimistic note at the end of the 30 years celebration of Dayton Agreement. There must be a possibility to change, to overhaul this system into the direction of more civic democracy. And Yasmin is right, there is an increasing number of population also with voting that they show that they want to go that direction. So let us be very clear also ahead of the next elections, because last elections people were hopeful, they became disappointed again. So that we as EU also show also support to them, not only be critical, but show support to them and say there is a perspective, you can do it. Look at Albania, look at Montenegro, please go for it and make sure that your politicians that you're going to elect serve your interest and not their own.
Thanks a lot. Robert, any final reflections? 30 seconds.
Following this, I pass.
Okay, then Yasmin, final minutes,
Yes,
maximum
so
30
quick,
seconds, 1 minute for
I
you.
published this report this year called the Dayton Plus Report in terms of specificities of constitutional reform. I'll say very quickly, I think first and foremost the key is that the initial round of constitutional reform in Bosnia and Herzegovina has to largely work within the existing system and clarify the existing system. First and foremost, for instance, the House of Peoples is an institutional body whose role needs to be diminished and clarified. This is also, I think, speaks to some of the methodological concerns that Maya has raised. Bosnia and Herzegovina's presidency, realistically, is probably not needed at all. It's either a body that should be abolished entirely, or it should be transformed into something like the Republic of Ireland, right? Basically, a top diplomat. The key point, however, I think is actually one of, and this is where the role of the international community, in particular countries like the Netherlands, is really, really important. The only way that constitutional reform in Bosnia and Herzegovina can take place in a meaningful and satisfactory fashion is if it is led by Bosnians, and that, by definition, means that neighboring states cannot be involved. Constitutional arrangements of Bosnia and Herzegovina are not the purview of Belgrade, they are not the purview of Zagreb. They are in any case bound by the Dayton Agreement, and therefore are not involved in that process. I guarantee you, if you gave Bosnia and Herzegovina 2 years to not have to deal with Zagreb or Belgrade, you would have constitutional reform after the end of those 2 years.
Thanks a lot. Okay, 10 seconds.
You surprised me.
Now it's only 10 seconds.
10
Yeah,
seconds.
Final message.
One
please,
message,
because
the international military presence should not be forever. That should be made quite clear, that it should be there as long as it has a very useful function, that is there as a reassurance force, but it should not remain there forever. We don't want forever missions which last for generations.
All right. Thanks a lot. I think we have a very short comment from Alden, but Alden, really 10 seconds because we're in need of coffee. Yeah, anyone can hand. Is there still a mic? The mic is coming. It's one sentence, Alden. So
No, I will try. I will try. I don't know. I don't want everybody to look at my back. So I want to comment very briefly on what Maya said and how Tineke responded on Dodik. It's very important because there is a warning in it.
Shortly.
I agree with Maya when she said, well, Dodik is a regional politician, and I would say politically, in the land of the blind, the king is one-eyed. So that's okay. But I totally agree with Tineke, and why I said this is because Dodik has become an executor. An executor of what? There are other actors that are actually behind the scene at this moment. Last year we had, for example, the All-Serb Assembly Declaration.
It's a long sentence, Alden.
It is. We have written an analysis as a think tank, and we warned Tineke about it. We warned the ambassador about it, other institutions, that there are greater plans, and if they cannot achieve it right now, de jure, they are trying to prepare it de facto on the field. So that is a concern, and we have to be conscious about it. That's what I want to say.
All right, let's end there. Hopefully on the second panel, a more optimistic note again. But thanks a lot, and please join me in thanking our great panel today. Thanks a lot. It was amazing. We have a short coffee break until 15 minutes before 12, and then we'll continue with the second panel. So please stay with us. Thank you. Thank you.
Yes. Welcome back, everyone. I hope everyone is well caffeinated to go into the second and last part of this conference. We're going to have a very smooth transition from the first panel, as the topic of democracy in action and civil empowerment was very well introduced by the audience as well as the panel speakers and by the final remark by Alden. So today we are not just going to discuss policy reforms and checklists. We are also here to explore the potential for a renewed social contract, one that can redefine the relationship between the state and its citizens, foster democratic resilience, and support Bosnia and Herzegovina's accession path to the EU. My name is Laura Jasper. I'm here on behalf of the Hague Center for Strategic Studies, which is always a mouthful. In my work at HSS, I look in great remark as well to the undermining of society and the nexus between state stability and conflict, which is something that has been a little bit of a red line in between today. At HSS, but also the lovely Klingendahl Institute and the BIHNL think tank, we really see ourselves as a connector between government, security, society, and the broader public. So that includes all of you. Therefore, just like with the first panel, we warmly welcome your input as well as your questions at the end, for which we have taken time for interactive Q&A. I will be moderating the session until 1 p.m., after which I have the pleasure to invite the last but not the least speaker of the day, His Excellency Henk van den Doel, before we go off into a well-deserved lunch. For democracy to be resilient, that social contracts must be built on trust, accountability, and active participation. But how do we renew that relationship in the face of state capture? And how do we transform the EU accession path from a bureaucratic exercise into a tool for genuine civic empowerment? To help us answer these questions, we have four very distinct voices with us today who are representing the rule of law, grassroots activism, policy expertise, and independent journalism. To start us off with the institutional reality, we have Sardjan Vlogavjanin, chairman of the board at Transparency International Bosnia and Herzegovina. If you could please welcome Sardjan to the room and take place. Sardjan has spent over 15 years diagnosing exactly where the social contract is failing. And as a leading expert in the rule of law, he has authored critical studies on capture states, democratization, and the deep systematic reforms needed to break that cycle of corruption. He joins us today to discuss how we can use the rule of law not just to punish crime, but to rebuild basic trust citizens need to believe in their institutions again. Next, representing the power of citizens to rewrite that contract themselves, we have Azra Berbic from the Foundation Atelier for Community Transformation. Please, Azra, you can join us on the stage. A lawyer, journalist, and activist, Azra works at the intersection of environmental protection and peace building. Whether she is defending the rivers of the Balkans or empowering youth, she demonstrates that democracy in action, the title of our panel, is often found outside of parliament, in the communities fighting for their natural resources and their future. To ensure that we never lose sight of the human story behind politics, we have Marjolein Koster. Marjolein is join us. Marjolein is an independent journalist who splits her time between the Netherlands and the Western Balkans. Through her work for outlets like Balkan Insight, VPRO, she specializes in telling the stories that often go unheard, connecting complex geopolitical shifts to the daily lives of citizens. And finally, bringing us the framework for integration, we welcome Sanja Ramic of the BIHNL think tank. Sanja is a legal specialist and researcher with deep expertise in European human rights and EU integration. With a background that bridges the Bosnian diaspora in European policy circles, she understands the technical as well as the legal mechanisms required to harmonize Bosnia and Herzegovina's realities with EU standards. All, thank you very much for joining and being with us here today. To set the stage, I will begin with opening questions to each of the panelists, for which they have about 5 to 7 minutes to answer. Before we're going to see whether there is already a reaction triggered from the room, and we'll continue with our panel discussion. Azra, if I may start with you. environmental movements in Bosnia and Herzegovina have demonstrated a remarkable cross-country cooperation, cross-community cooperation as well. How can these grassroots efforts be leveraged to strengthen democratic participation and accountability?
Well, yeah, to start with the optimism, I just wanted to have a short comment before, there was a question how we should start reinventing Dayton and constitutional changes. I would pitch the idea here now to let's start into putting right to free, clean and safe environment and right to water into our constitution maybe, because that's doesn't seem, to our politician, it wouldn't seem as a big political question, but I actually think it's the biggest political question and one of the biggest security threats if we don't protect it. Nevertheless, regarding the environmental movements across Bosnia and Herzegovina and our region, I have to say, so ACT works not only in Bosnia and Herzegovina, but also across the region with the environmental movements, grassroots, and more traditional civil society organizations, but primarily grassroots movements, which are showing us actually what is democracy in action. They are truly from the scratch rebuilding the society and right of citizens, of people, to take participation in the decision-making process from the very start. And how that came to be is because they were not included from the very start in decision-making processes when it comes to the things that consider the environment. Whether that is the river, the forest, the land, whatever that might be. So I am extremely proud to be part of this movement because it gives you a lot of satisfaction on a daily basis. In some cases, that doesn't mean that local movement has won the battle, but what is the added value and actually the biggest outcome always is that you have the local community in many cases, which is consisted not by, I'm also a village girl. And within my local community, I fought many environmental struggles. And when the movement fighting the construction of small hydropower plants in Bosnia and Herzegovina has risen and reached the peak, and it became a regional movement, I was someone who was fighting that also to protect the river that I grew up by. So, and I got this support from the people from all across the country and from all across the region. And it's not only, people nearby from Sarajevo and Zenica, but people from Foča, Visegrad, from all of these, from Bihać, from Novi Grad, so from all of these parts of the country. So when you have that, and I am privileged in a sense that I got to get the education during the years, and also that I was very much educated through civil society, so I do have bigger level of knowledge. But in general, people don't have this knowledge and they don't have the skills. But what they do have is the sense that they can change the things because this is the red line for them. Because we can agree that Bosnia and Herzegovina is a society that lacks, to some extent, prosperity. Actually, the last youth report, two reports on the Western Balkans shows that the primarily reason why the youth is leaving the region, and Bosnia and Herzegovina especially, is because the lack of prosperity, which is caused by deep corruption, nepotism, and political instability. So this is a research base. It's not just, my opinion. So in that sense, this brings back the prosperity. So how is this done? Is that these people then start to learn and they question everything and everyone. And they start to learn and they try to find allies. And I have to say, in this environmental movement, for every grassroots movement from all across the country, the media is the key ally. And Marlon was one of them in many cases over the years, because it's always important also as well to have the international coverage of this topic and to have it not only in our local language, but also, in other languages. And on top of that, then there comes the, I call it civil society 1.0, you know, the traditional civil society. ACT is not a traditional civil society organization. It was founded to fill the gap in between, you know, these communication channels, in a sense, how to put this problem as an agenda to the politician tables, which all we as a coalition have managed to do, but it was a result of actually of a decades of struggles from a grassroots movements. And all of us within the team are members of grassroots movements from all across the country. So it's a great leverage for us to be able to transfer then the know-how with people. And we are not the only ones, of course. There are many of us from across the region, and we are proud to say that this system is functioning in a sense that we serve as a resource center for them, and not only us. So we ensure them, you know, legal support and aid, campaigning, arrange meetings, you know, we connect them with the allies. At this very moment, actually, Transparency International is working on us. It's supporting one grassroots movement at Kupres. So it's a beautiful cohesion of people, and then coming together for a mutual goal, to protect the nature, and right of people to protect their nature. Right to water, right to family life and life, you know, life right to clean environment. So it is truly a pyramid of on really stable ground from people from all different backgrounds coming together and making the changes. And this also results with making the change within the system. How? The institutions started to change their practices because of the raised level of requests toward the institutions. Because I remember at the beginning we had the meetings with the institutions, and these people at the institutions would tell us, we are overburdened with all of these requests by people. They request the information, they request the answers, but that's what you are supposed to do since the start. And we tell them then make sure to include people, real people, not to make this fake participation. Include people from the start in order for you to make this process easier. So this is also now a very end the results, and especially in some local community, we now have a really deep cooperation in between local community governments and people, but also on a higher level, we really see now the understanding from the governments on cantonal levels, on federal level especially. We see that they are now hiring external experts in order to consult them in these environmental cases, because they don't want to lose these cases at court, because it's not also good for them, and we are fighting it, you know. So yeah, I would say the cohesion of the community is that people who, you know, decades ago were fighting each other during the conflict are coming together for the sake of the greater good and to protect the rights of future generations, not us, changing the practices of the institutions. We call it the system of rebuilding institutions, and also changing the perspective of people on local ground from across the country, where they really understand that they do have the power and they do have the say, and they can participate in decision-making process, and they request that. I will end this here.
Thank you very much, Azra, for highlighting and exploring as well what empowerment to act means for citizens and how we can go there as well outside of the constitutional factors. You have introduced the next question for the next speaker wonderfully, because no. Okay, can we maybe have some help with that? There is a glass that was broken, just to make sure no one cuts their fingers. Yes. Okay, try to help. Okay.
If this was kafana, this would be, you know, very much appreciated, because we are celebrating 13 years of Dayton. But we are not still yet there.
We have the saying, scherven brengen
but if you see me at kafana, you can expect this from me.
Okay. Well, I was instructed not to touch.
Apologize.
So no worries. Let me ask this, the next question. But for you, Marjolein, actually. Based on your reporting and work with communities, what are the most significant obstacles to citizen engagement in Bosnia and Herzegovina, and how can they be overcome to rebuild trust in democratic processes, and how has your experience on the ground working with these communities and talking with them shaped your perspective on, well, the topic of today?
Well, first of all, thank you to all of the partners who organized this conference and who invited me to speak at this panel. I don't know if I should continue talking. Well, maybe, yeah.
Cleaning the mess that are
The Bosnians made.
Symbolic, representation of us cleaning the mess of the of the political leaders.
As a think tanker, you have to do everything.
Yeah. Very, very humble. Yes.
European Union leadership. Be careful because
Thank you so much, Wouter.
Without repeating all the things that have been mentioned in the first panel, I would like to make one small remark before stating all of the other things that we are going to speak about in this panel, is that we should not forget that the way, like Dayton, of course, ended the violence, but it's also the way how Bosnia is constructed nowadays and how it is divided is also the result of ethnic cleansing and genocide, and we should not forget that. And I think that should be the basis of, that should be in the back of our heads constantly. And therefore, I think it's also always very difficult, you know, to touch upon any further topics such as we want to do now. But recently I spoke to a young politician who is in one of the few multi-ethnic political parties in Bosnia. And because I was questioning her, like, okay, but you know, why aren't politicians working on that? You know, why aren't they actively trying to change Dayton? And she answered something like, yeah, okay, you know, of course we want to, but you know, for example, you're saving money to buy a new house and you don't have the money yet. Are you just, you know, staying in the old house and not renovating or not decorating? You know, while you are saving money for that new house, you can still try and to improve the current house and make the conditions there as good as possible. And I think this is what we are trying to touch upon in this panel, just to look at, for a second, forget about the fact that Dayton should be reinvented or changed or abolished or whatever, and try to look at the current situation. And I would like to start maybe with an example of the work that I did 2 years ago. It was a cross-border investigation together with Bosnian colleagues about illegal logging, so illegal deforestation. And we investigated, you know, places in the forest. Bosnia is covered in forest. It's beautiful. Bosnia is doing way better than Netherlands. We have almost no forest left. Exactly, more than half of the country is covered in forest. But unfortunately, also, especially corrupt politicians and their partners, their friends, their allies, are sometimes illegally cutting the wood. So together with two Bosnian colleagues and Dutch colleague and a French colleague, we tried to investigate, you know, what is going on, where are these trees going? And soon we found out this is not only an investigation about corruption. You know, you can never investigate, at least from my perspective, there's always some part of ethnical division as well. So it started already with my Bosnian colleagues posing the question, okay, but you know, if we are in investigation, this mayor who is from SNSD, a Serb politician, then we should also think maybe to investigate some Croat and some Bosniak, you know. And it's not like they want that to do. It's not like they are like, okay, we have to research every ethnicity equally, but it's more like if they don't do it, they might get attacked, you know, for having political reasons, you know, for only attacking Serb politicians. And at the end, it resulted in several cases where we found some illegal activities. And there was one particular case, I forgot the name, Šipovo. Yeah, a small town.
I just won the case again.
Yeah. That's why I'm coming up with the example. So the mayor of Šipovo, he has many wood companies, and his family has wood companies, and his friends have wood companies. He, without giving tenders, you know, the wood is just being distributed amongst them. I think he's one of the, although it's a small town and a mayor, he's one of the richest men in the country. So, I mean, we got the proof. It was all very clear that this wasn't exactly how a democratic process should go. But he was very angry, and I think he was particularly angry because we published in international media, because it was already known in Bosnia. And so after we published, he called my colleagues, and yes, my Bosnian colleagues, and he wasn't just angry, he used very sexist language towards my female colleague, very discriminatory language, you know, saying they were politically motivated, etc., etc. Luckily, my colleague recorded that phone call and outed it, published it, and in the end, they filed a complaint against this mayor for, you know, because he was obstructing press freedom and using this type of language. And actually, recently, I think last week, they won the court case against him. So I'm giving this example to show both the struggles there are, not just battling corruption, but also you always have to struggle with these ethnic, how to say, divisions. We will come to that later, how to use that language. But also hopeful, you know, that actually they filed a complaint, they went to court, and they won the case. Oh, yeah, in Republika Srpska. So there, and it also shows the resilience of these type of colleagues who are, despite all the things that are going against them, they still go on, and I really admire that.
Thank you very much for giving the example as well. It's also showing that these practical examples help us to understand what happens on the ground, and you're following each other very perfectly, because you have touched upon the question as well of corruption, and that's going to lead me naturally to Sarjan. From your perspective, what would you say are the most effective mechanisms for rebuilding trust in public institutions, and how can these reinforce as well the EU integration? You have done work on democratization, and democratization as a concept has also been very important. Is it working, the mic?
Let me check. I think so. Yeah, it's working. Okay. Thank you, Laura, and let me first thank Klingendal and Hague Center for organizing event today. And I'm in particular glad to see that Bosnian Netherlands think tank is partnering those prominent think tanks in organizing this event today. I think that is very important for us in Bosnia and Herzegovina to have such organizations here in The Hague, having in mind that Netherlands is a very prominent voice in the process of EU integration. I believe that is very important, and I wish you all the luck, guys, in your further efforts. Back to your question. I must admit that I do not have a short answer. But let me try, and I'll try to keep it within 5 minutes. Really, I believe that there is no quick fix solutions in situation as we do have in Bosnia and Herzegovina. Speaking about trust, I believe that trust, lack of trust per se is not the problem. It's a rather symptom of deep structural problems that we have in Bosnia and Herzegovina. And in particular, I believe that the problem for Bosnia and Herzegovina today is state capture. We already heard in first panel some references to this issue, but I really believe that is the key problem that the country is facing today. And due to the total capture of the state in Bosnia and Herzegovina, we do have, as a result, captured society, which is even bigger problem in our case. Bosnia and Herzegovina today is textbook example of state capture, and political parties effectively capture the state. All processes, all key institutions in a country are basically serving the very narrow interests of the political parties. So that's the issue. And speaking about how to overcome the problem, we are again facing another challenge: how to convince those who captured the state and who holds the most power in Bosnia and Herzegovina to do something against their own interests. Because that's the kind of situation we should convince them to cut the branch they are sitting on. So that makes no logic, right? And just to illustrate to what extent Bosnia is totally captured by political elite, according to our findings, more than 90% of jobs in public sector, political parties distributing based on clientelistic criteria. That's the way how they mobilize support for elections. In situation as we have it in Bosnia, citizens do have a very simple dilemma. They can leave the country, as many did, or they can play according to the rules of the game that political parties establish, meaning that they should accept to become loyalists of the political parties in order to get job, in order, if they are owners of small business, in order to get business from the government, in order to get health insurance or place in the hospital. So that is a very difficult situation. Even in theory, state capture is the most complex type of corruption, and of course, it's not easy to overcome it. It is possible, but it is difficult. In my opinion, key word when we are talking about the solutions is democratization. Democratization, but not only democratization of the institutions, but also democratization of political parties. Political parties today operates mafia-like organized crime groups. We had opportunity over the last few weeks to see many media appearances of different footages where the prominent ministers from different level of government are involved in serious crime. And the thing is, with the judiciary captured, there is no way for them to be prosecuted. And impunity is basically extremely widespread. So democratization at first place would be my answer, how to restore the trust. And I know we tried a lot of things with that regard, but I believe democratization of political parties would be very important to see in the country. Of course, insisting on improving integrity of elections in Bosnia and Herzegovina is also very important. In my humble opinion, we haven't had free and fair elections so far in Bosnia and Herzegovina during all these 30 years, and that would be very important to secure free and fair elections. We heard also discussion about OHR, and I think that we should be very honest, in my opinion, and say that today OHR is a part of the problem. If we are referring to opinions of Venice Commission on different things, we should also take into consideration that Venice Commission said 20 years ago that role of OHR is not aligned with the democratic situation that country, with democratic principles, and we should take that into consideration. A very simple question with that regard: to whom OHR is responsible? Who is in a position to be? Who is creating the policy that the High Representative is following? So I would stop here to
That was wonderful. Thank you very much. It's extremely important as well, like you said, the matter of democratization, which linked a bit to my next question for our final panelist is, Sanja, how can citizens also be very, let's say, better empowered to access justice and hold institutions to certain ethical or legal standards? especially within the context of EU-driven reforms. If the yes, it's working.
It's working, I think.
Yes.
Okay, thank you, Laura, for your question. Well, I think panel up opened up to pretty big questions, but I would rather go now from the ground up a little bit. If we ask 30 years after the Dayton, where we can see actually the democratization and the peace building in practice, in action in Bosnia and Herzegovina, I think unfortunately we cannot see that in the institutions. Very often we can see that in the civil society organizations, in the grassroots movements, in the local communities, within the citizens. And I think environmental movements are particularly powerful example to this because, you know, it brings the different ethnic backgrounds together to fight for some common goal, and they are very vocal about it. And I think this joint struggle that they have basically did so much more to the normalization and building relationships between the people than any high dialogue did in the recent 30 years. And that's what I saw while I was dealing also and cooperating with these movements. However, at the same time, we cannot see these massive protests on a scale like we see in the neighboring countries. And, you know, when you talk with the people and the civil society organizations, they usually say, you know, the people are afraid, they are tired, they don't believe that it would change anything anyway. So I think we have this little island of the civic courage in this whole level C of the resignation. So when we talk about the empowerment of the citizens and, you know, holding these institutions accountable to these ethical and legal standards, I think the empowerment has to tackle the both. Also these civil society organizations and the citizens who are quite active and fighting the system, but also opening the door for others. I think the big part in that is also understanding the EU accession process and the EU language. The citizens cannot connect, you know, with the language of the EU negotiation chapters and the EU recommendations because they don't understand that. So if they don't see that link, which that actually means if we change some law, because the EU requires us to, if they don't see that link, they cannot understand what is actually EU accession is meaning for them on the ground for their rights. So I think it's very important to the message and the communication also from the EU, but also from the institutions has to be a little bit more clear in a clearer terms for people to understand actually what the EU accession brings to them. The second thing I would say it's you know, providing protection for those who are, as I said, fighting the system, because, you know, in Bosnia, in Herzegovina, we have the mechanisms who are allowing the civil society organizations and the citizens to be the part of the decision-making process, but these mechanisms are not being implemented, or if they are, to some extent, they are just in a formal way. So basically, if we do have the, you know, the involvement of the civil society organization, it's not like in a structured, substantive way. So I think, you know, the protection of the civil society organizations and the citizens who are actually raising the voices has to be on a much greater scale, because they are the first ones who will use these mechanisms, but also, you know, the first one who are facing the threats, the abusive lawsuits like SLAP. I think Azra can also say much more about that. And also involving the civil society organizations in the reform from the beginning, not at the very end. As I said, there are a lot of mechanisms for the involvement, but they are not, you know, being consulted at all. So I think that's very important to be there when the reforms are discussed, and you know, whether solutions for certain problems are agreed. However, I think also the EU has a little homework to do also in this, I have to be honest and to say the EU communication in B&H has not been consistent, and I think also Tineke mentioned that, and I'm very glad that you mentioned that point. So you have the situation that sometimes the EU is very vocal and very strong, you know, about the justice and fighting the discrimination, but in the other situations, you know, it prioritizes this short-term stability and the political deals, even if we still have this undermine trust in the institutions. So from the outside, the people can see, you know, in the reports of the European Commission that to some extent there is some kind of a criticism, but at the same time they are sitting at the table with the same actors without really following through. So I think, you know, if the EU really wants to see that citizens can feel the EU accession process as their own, also as their project, they have to listen and consult civil society a little bit more to incorporate what they are saying when they are assessing the country progress. So I think their inputs has a really big value to be also in these reports and to become a part of the political statement. Yeah.
Thank you very much, Shania, for your opening statement. You have touched upon also two very important points of having a shared language and speaking in the same terminology, but also to involvement at the beginning instead of at the end. In the spirit of involvement at the beginning instead of at the end. I'm looking towards the room. Are there already some first reactions or people who would already have a very burning question? No worries if they're not. I have many. I don't see any hands at this point, so then we'll move forward with a couple of the follow-up questions towards the panel. Maybe, Sarjan, if I could ask you one follow-up question. We've talked about democratization. So how would you say that, from your past experience, how can public institutions demonstrate integrity and transparency quickly enough in order to rebuild trust in a polarized environment where sometimes time is a question and is important as well?
I would say only under pressure. They could show integrity and accountability. And I think that is about creating a situation in which costs of resisting reforms becoming higher than costs of implementing the reforms. I know that is very difficult to achieve because we do need to achieve a situation structurally in the country. And I'm afraid that with the recent events, situation deteriorating. When we speak about civil society, after the closure of USAID programs, civil society organizations in Bosnia and Herzegovina are facing a lot of problems. USAID was a prominent donor that financed a lot of media, not only civil society organizations. And very often USAID and the US Embassy, US government, were in position to push for reforms. After the changes in Washington, we cannot expect that, and the closure of USAID programs. Also, situation is in particular difficult in the Republic Srpska. With the introduction of Belarus or Russian-style laws there, it is extremely difficult and dangerous for civil society organizations to operate in the Republic of Srpska. Not only Transparency International, but all other organizations that are present in the Republic of Srpska facing dramatic problems. And we need a stronger role of EU in that regard. What is also, when we speak about the role of EU, in my opinion, very often EU approach is rather technical and rather ticking the boxes. let's take example of two laws that EU insisting on to open negotiations formally: law on courts and law on high judicial and prosecutorial council. So the conditionality is to adopt laws, not to see what effects will be. And we very often have such situation. EU is focused on formally on having laws in place, but very often implementation is missing. And I think that EU should take into consideration more that reforms are not only technical processes, that reforms are political processes par excellence. And it's not only about adopting laws, but it's also implementation that matters. And that with reforms, we are changing the situation on the ground. Who is accountable to whom? Who is responsible to whom? Who will benefit from the reforms? And I'm afraid that that kind of approach is missing. And again, I think that situation deteriorating instead of improving when it comes to the EU integration of Bosnia and Herzegovina.
Thank you so much. I've seen both Sanja and Azra nodding, so let's say start with Sanja.
I will just add very quickly. Completely agree. So non-implementation, I think, should be raised as a very serious issue. I don't think Bosnia actually lacks of the legislation and the institutions. Actually, we have a very good legislation in place, which is pretty much harmonized with the EU acquis. So, but it's not being implemented, and I think that's the crucial problem. And it's not, you know, we don't talk about it a lot. We don't discuss it. And also, to go back to the role of the civil society, the communication of the EU institutions with the civil society, I think here is crucial, because the society organizations know where the system breaks. They know that from the ground, and they are following these processes very clearly. So I think their inputs are very important, you know, when as I said, when the EU institutions, EU Commission is assessing the country's progress reports, and these kinds of issues has to be as a part of the EU conditionality, as a very important part, so yeah.
Azra, we were also nodding. Would you like to react?
The issue that we have, this is also my experience that my fellow colleagues and activists have within the environmental movement, that we often get taken more serious by Tina Kennedy visiting Bosnia and her colleagues, and whenever we are at the EU Parliament or wherever we might be, than the EU office at the delegation in Bosnia and Herzegovina. And I know that there has been a lot of criticisms. Like, I know when the delegation meets people from the civil society sector, because I know these people, I know Srđan's colleagues, I know other colleagues from the media and from the civil society organization, that they are criticizing this approach of my general impression, and this is going to be really harsh, but I'm going to use this example, is like the EU delegation and EU in general as an international factor in Bosnia and Herzegovina, one of the most important, if not the most important. The citizens, the people, and politicians, local politicians, political leaders are in this vicious circle of violence, which the perpetrator of the violence are political leaders in Bosnia and Herzegovina. So we have this circle of violence where people are starting to request and say, okay, now, of course, our politicians are not getting us seriously, despite everything that we are, you know, within also civil society. But also now we see the EU, they come to us, they speak with us, and then they make these arrangements and agreements with our politicians that are obviously only for the procedure purposes and to tick the box, not actually to make substantial change. And we have our political leaders giving breadcrumbs, literally, brought to the EU, like to their requests and to us as a citizens. And one of the best examples was, so in the midst of all of this fiasco around in Republika Srpska with Dodik, and he has this separatist rhetorics, Republika Srpska lacks money, they don't have the money for the public sector, they don't, we know for that, for example, public forestry company, they haven't received the salaries for months, people within the ministries are not sure whether they will get the money. There are sanctions, so how some of these people are going to be receiving the money and whatnot. Wants to change the bank system. But at the same time, they're imposing these foreign agent laws. They recriminalized the defamation. They are fully going on shrinking space for vocal voices to stop them as much as they can. And at the same time, Dodik goes all around. He goes to Russia. He goes to Orban as well, asking for money because they lack money. And this whole time, EU, that was last spring, EU holds this, grudge and say, okay, we will be strict. But actually, at the end, they fell off. And I know when I met the EU delegations and people from EU, from the parliament, they say, but people will suffer. People are suffering already. I met in Croatia people who are retired, who are working in Croatian hotels because their children don't have the salaries or are, don't have the jobs. And trust me, within that communication, they are very much respected in Croatia while working. But it's deeply painful for someone who has worked for 40 years and it's retired that has to go to the other country, even though it is a neighboring country, to work. And then we are suffering because of that politics, because we really, in order to have this stronger resilience of people, not only around environmental issues, but around the social justice issues that we are facing very much deeply, and around this, class division that we have, that obviously the politicians and everyone who's close to them are living their best life and everyone else is struggling. There is no middle class anymore. So I have to raise this question of class. So there is no middle class, and all of these people are struggling to survive, and then you have these politicians see they're being rewarded. This is also with reform agenda, with all of these processes. It's like until they are pushed to the wall, there is, because they are, of course, protecting not national interests of people. They are protecting their own interests, and they want to secure for them to be in power this way or another, whatever the reforms or changes might happen. So we have, the EU has to stop enabling them into doing that and to be violent towards us as people and towards the also all the international factors, because it seems like EU is acting like they are, we are in the kindergarten and our politicians are kids. The EU needs to call them up and say, you are the grown-up and responsible, so act as a grown-up, which we are not seeing for a decade. And of course, this is not only our politicians to blame, because as Yasin said, they've played this game for a very long time and they're really successful at it. It's really the EU, because we had, and the international community, peace, the OHR, we've seen 10 years of, just going here and there, trying to implement these decisions of the European Court for Human Rights, not succeeding at it. It is like people were not sure what is the role of the international community anymore. And one of my biggest fear is, because I really work a lot, I spend a lot of my time in small cities from all across the region, in the villages. And I understand the perspective. My biggest fear is that people are not only, they have lost the trust in the politicians local, but they're also losing the trust in the EU and their processes. And that worries me very much. Yeah.
Thank you, Rosa. Marjolein, I saw you also wanted to respond, and can you maybe also explain or maybe highlight how media and public storytelling can contribute in a context where polarization remains so high and distrust?
I have to think about that question, but first,
Take your time.
in the meantime, I will add something about the role of the EU in Bosnia, maybe, well, Western Balkans, but let's focus on Bosnia now. Because I remember the moment when the news came that, you know, the chapters, the accession talks would be opened if no. And from a Western or Dutch perspective, you know, I also noticed among colleague journalists, like, okay, Bosnia must be happy, you know, the people must be happy. Now they're finally one step closer to the European Union. And then I spoke with some of the civil society organizations who actually track, you know, the progress in all of these reforms. And, you know, they were not really particularly happy because they felt like, again, our politicians are rewarded for something that they didn't do. And, okay, the alternative to just stay there maybe is also not the best. But no, they were not happy, they were not thankful. And I also think this is very much a misconception that from the West we still feel like people in the Balkans should be thankful, you know, for us giving them something. And this also comes in place because Sergio mentioned, of course, you know, like how it's so much ticking the boxes when it comes to implementation of laws. But I also feel this is the case when it comes to, for example, funds and subsidies that are available from the EU to civil society organizations in Bosnia. Like so often, and especially now with USAID, which is not there anymore, many of them are really struggling. And even though, because this is also something I've heard someone working in the European Commission saying, like, okay, but you know, we have all these programs, you know, you can subscribe. Why aren't these organizations from Bosnia, you know, applying? But it's not simple as that, you know. It's something that has been thought of in Brussels. The processes are very complicated. It's type of language that many of these people in small villages, or for example, they do not have that type of language. Organizations in the Netherlands or Germany, you know, we have practiced for decades how to write the proposal in such a way that you will get the money. And since this is not working in Bosnia, I think we can all conclude this is not working, then the EU should maybe also reflect on itself. Okay, this is not working. Maybe we should have a different approach. Maybe we should listen to those civil society organizations. What do they actually need? How can we actually support them? And I think, although there is no quick fix, I really think this is one of the key things that has to be done. And one more thing I want to say before I forget, also when it's about, you know, developing a type of language, for me, this is also in a way that, for example, in the Netherlands, but maybe broadly speaking globally, especially when it comes to journalists, that maybe we should try and stop to always picture Bosnia as a country with 3 ethnicities. Maybe we should look at it in a different way, that it's actually one group of people who are only, you know, working in the interest of their own ethnicity, and then there's a group of people that are actually doing lots of good things and working towards a democratic country. Because if we keep on highlighting these divisions, which are certainly there and we should not ignore them, but we should also, you know, for example, if you look at environmental movements, it's not like if Azra is sitting in the office and all the time she's thinking like, oh my God, look how good we are sitting here with many different ethnicities. No, you know, they just have a common goal and they are fighting for their own nature. It has nothing to do anymore with those ethnicities. So yeah, that's what I wanted to add.
Thank you so much, Arlene. Are there, at this point, yes, I see 2 hands, 3 hands. Let's start from the back and move forwards. We'll, and please also state who you are, where you're from, and then if your question is directed to a particular person, that also helps.
Hi, Bekir. Bekir College. As a psychologist, I have the following question. I would love to hear your thoughts on the following question. Considering youth, hope, and the experienced hopelessness, how to facilitate structural experiences of ownership in contributing to innovative solutions to, for instance, environmental like challenges, as Azra mentioned, like as Azra mentioned. So I would love to hear the thoughts on how to involve youth. Yeah.
Thank you. Let's also take the second and third question that we can move forward. Thank you.
Hi, yes, thank you very much for your insights today. My question also has to touch upon what Ms. Koster said about these ethnic divisions. I think we spoke a lot about very important things today, about security, about constitutional reform. But I think something that's at the core of the issues in Bosnia is that there's still a sense of like, okay, but what is Bosnian identity? Who do we belong to? I think this kind of rhetoric is very pervasive and it's been used by politicians both in Bosnia and in neighboring countries as well. So my question is, how do we bring about an environment where everyone, no matter if they're from Sarajevo or from Banja Luka or from Bihać or anywhere in Bosnia, any of these small places as well, which are all equally important, how do we foster an environment where we all feel like we're fighting for change together and where we can be kind of exploited to, always think against each other and always point fingers on each other instead of working together. And of course, I think, as we spoke, I think environment is a great issue that everyone can take ownership of, but what are the other kind of mediums or channels that we can use? Maybe is it sports, is it music, is it food? There's so many different ones. And I also want to ask, okay, but what could be the EU's role in instituting this? Because I think we can all agree that just dealing with the politicians could go on for another 30 years. And that would be my question. Anyone can answer. Thank you very much.
Thank you. Let's go to Maya for the question before returning to our panelists again. Right here in the front row.
Thank you. I want to go back to what Azra said about citizens not understanding the EU process, not understanding the language, not understanding the approach. Yeah, okay, I'm sorry. And that is quite correct, but also because some of you come from the NGOs, you come from the civil society. I have to throw back to you again, because you also use the same language, you also have the same approach. So for example, when you were explaining democratization, you said democratization of political parties, integrity of elections, but what does it actually mean to the citizens? How can you make that plastic? It doesn't mean anything to them. It's the same language, it's the same gibberish as if, the European Union process. So how do you make it plastic for the citizens, especially with the use of AI, with the use of technologies, and so on?
Thank you. Who would like to reply first? Azra? Okay. You don't need to, but
yeah. I will first answer the last question from Maya. Is like we don't use the reason why these environmental struggles are successful is partially, I would dare to say, also for us understanding that we cannot use these abstract terms and concepts when working with people on the ground. And for me, myself also, a lot of these concepts were very much abstract because we firmly believe that if we are not able to explain something really simple, we are not able to understand it fully, we ourselves. So, unlike all of these big donors that Marlon just mentioned, we do not go to the local communities and say, this is the way, this is how this should be done. So we have the situation, crisis of civil society sector is also greatly part the responsibility of big donors within the region is because they create these programs in, all across in European centers. And they say, this is what you need, this is what you should do. Or this worked here, so let's implement this program also here. And then you have civil society sector that has to adapt to this language, to use these terms, to, in order to get the money for the job that they are already doing, the great job that they are doing. And of course, also I have to say, and be honest, also within the civil society sector across our region, not everyone is doing the great job, and there are unfortunately some of them who are purpose to themselves. And that's it, that's the reality, but that's also the European reality. Even more so, I would dare to say, than in our region. So we don't come with that mindset of, oh, you patronizing message, you should do this. We come, we assess the needs, people tell us what they need, and we then tell them, we can connect you with these groups so they can share these experiences. This is what has worked here, and that's it. But yeah, the key is not to use those terms. I completely agree, because it's so abstract. And I always go, this is my mindset, my mom is not a highly educated woman, and I always go to her when I speak about something. I ask her and my neighbors, do you understand what I'm saying? If they don't understand, then no one will. It doesn't matter if I do understand that. Regarding the involvement of youth and how to improvise and have the innovative tactics, that's, I would dare to say, a question. It's a global challenge, a global problem, not only for our region, but for our region is, they really young people want to be heard. I'm still part of this youth group still for a few months. But I did work with youth a lot. Our team is very, very young, so mostly contained by the young people. Is having them not having all the skills and all the knowledge they need, but having the support system that they can, and a healthy environment, in a sense that it's not toxic and that people are there to share the knowledge and that you can grow and improve your skills. But I firmly believe, because I see two of you here, you know, you are all obviously Balkan or have Balkan origin. I firmly believe in brain circulation. So, you know, so I would be really happy if I would see, and I've done a lot of research on this, if I would see young people coming back to our country with all of this knowledge and skills, not only having this situation when there are highly educated people that our country has invested the money and resources going to the other countries, but how to include is literally we have to go to small communities, to underprivileged communities, and to ask young people what are their needs. Because it's, trust me, I grew up in a village. You have to go to young people. It's not the same. That's, I think, here also the situation. But it's the completely different situation if you are living in Mostar, Banja Luka, and Sarajevo. And trust me, someone from Garadiška, someone from Kakanj, someone from Ljubuški, for them it's a goal to go to the center of that region. Because studies shows that young people in the Western Balkans, they don't have the means to travel. Not only to travel across the region, they don't have the means to travel to the other side of the country. They don't read a lot, they don't have the access to, you know, this critical thinking. Almost all the information they get is from the social media, which is highly corrupt. It's information, is not the knowledge, because there is a big difference in between two of those. And therefore, especially with the legacy of the last conflict, they don't have the chance to meet people from other communities and these other ethnic backgrounds, which I was privileged. I even after the war, I was raised in the community that was still ethnically, you know, there were different ethnicities, so I'm happy. But now people don't have that opportunity. You know, it's this is really personal for me because I've been through all of these struggles, but also I just had this experience yesterday meeting these brilliant girls from Zagreb. We met on a train, and we discussed this issue, and she also shares this, you know. So I feel, you know, empowered to share this because I know that this is a struggle for the people from the region. I will stop here.
Thank you, Azar, as well, for the very personal reflection. I saw Sarjan in thoughts. Would you like to respond briefly before?
To answer your question, you are probably right. Very often civil society is not communicating in the right way their messages, but we should be also aware that civil society can play or should play different roles. Direct communication with the citizens, articulating the citizens' need is one of the possible roles, but also civil society is playing the role of advocating for changes, and it should be capable of communicating a right diagnosis of the situation, and if its idea to participate in policy debate, civil society need to be at the same level of discussion, if discussed with the EU or with the stakeholders, or if discussed with the decision makers. So in that regard, I think that is necessary to play both roles. And I do agree with Azra that sometimes EU maybe is not communicating in the right way. But also I believe that what is the problem when it comes to the citizens' trust in the EU accession process? It's also credibility of the process as such. And we should not underestimate the capability of citizens to understand what's happening. And they are looking, of course, from the perspective of their own interests. People understand that very much. And they look what is the consequence of, I don't know, Bosnia and Herzegovina hasn't adopted growth plan or adopted what that will mean for the citizen in Kakanj or in Trebinje. What are the concrete consequences of that? Of course, that we cannot expect, and probably that's the case in Europe, that citizens are not participating in the policy debate on, I don't know, what could be the super specific thing which is not part of their own life. Referring to the Ivan's question, how to achieve that, I think that we should be aware that political elites are very clever in using different tactics to prevent collective actions of the citizens in Bosnia and Herzegovina across the ethnic lines. That is very important for them, to prevent collective actions across the entity lines. And they are spending a lot of energy in thinking how to do that, because that would jeopardize their position of unlimited control of the resources, processes in the country. And their tactics is also to escalate time to time, to escalate crisis, but not completely, just in order to do homogenization of their ethnic group. If the crisis is present, of course, the positions of leaders, their own positions, matters a lot, and institutions are put aside. So discussing on democratization, those are all things that and lessons that we learned, I do hope, over the 30 years, and that democratization is something that, in my opinion, the most important thing for Bosnia and Herzegovina now.
Thank you. Marjolein, you were also reacting.
Yeah, I think also it's perhaps also a bit hard to know like what is civil society, because when I think of the civil society in Bosnia, I think it's much broader than just the organizations that might have been there for many years. I mean, ACT is still relatively new. They connect with many small communities in all of the villages and rural areas. Those people are not in any institutions. You know, those are just people who go out on the street to protect their rivers, for example. I was also thinking, I also wanted to give an example of what Azra said, like going into those small villages, for example, to speak to people. And of course, I understand if as a policymaker from the Netherlands or the EU and you go on on a business trip to Bosnia, it's a hard country to travel in. There's lots of mountains, and there's almost no highways. So maybe you cannot go to every small village, and I don't think anybody is expecting you to do that. But I do think, for me, the most valuable moments and the most interesting conversations that really have learned me more about Bosnia and the people who live there and how they see their future are, for example, if you go to a random cafe and speak with strangers, or this is my go-to for everybody who is going to visit Sarajevo soon, is to go on a hike to Trebević, drink, yes, go to Jure Franco. It's like a mountain hut. It's not a big hike. You can do it in the morning or in the afternoon. It's amazing. You will enjoy it. And every time I go to that mountain hut, I meet interesting people who explain me about Bosnian political system. Recently, the last time I was there, I came across a group of mountain rescuers. And they do this voluntarily because they don't want to. Because they don't want to take, but they also don't want to take any money from the government, because they feel if we take money from the government, then we always will be restricted to what they want us to do. While our goal is to be a mountain rescue club, just to be there for the people who need help in the mountains. Yeah, and no law that secures them health insurance, for example. Yes, it's but they are doing it, despite that they don't get any support, they are still doing it voluntarily. I also wanted to say something else, but I forgot. So
you actually have some time to think about that.
Because also about Bosnian identity. Of course, it's not up to me to say anything about what Bosnian identity is, but I do think it's a very long process. In the beginning, it was highlighted. It's not like Bosnia just. Bosnia has been a country like ages ago, so there is something as a... Yes, exactly. It's not like it only exists since the 90s, so there is something like a Bosnian identity. And the thing that I think as outsiders is just, it's not up to us to say if someone is Serb, Croat, Bosniak, or whatever. We should not highlight those divisions. Bosnia is a country, so we are speaking with Bosnians, and I think that should be the start. And whenever it's relevant, of course, we can speak about those ethnic divisions, but the start should be Bosnia as a country with Bosnians.
Thank you very much. Also, looking at the time and being me the timekeeper, should your question not been, should you not have had the time to ask your question, we have a nice networking lunch after, which you are invited as well to talk with our panel speakers. Before moving on towards the last speaker of the day, I would like to challenge each of our participants a little bit. If you could, in one sentence, just give one final message or remark to the audience, both in person as well as online. What do they need to take with them when leaving this beautiful building here today? Let's start from the back with Sajan, maybe, and then move towards me again. I said it was a bit of a challenge.
Not to reinvent the wheel, but just that that democratization is the most important thing for Bosnia and Herzegovina currently.
Thank you. Sanja?
Yeah. I think when the European institutions are criticizing and praising governments, they had to go a little bit beyond the official narrative and take to the civil society organizations and what they are saying and pointing as a problem a little bit more serious, and to make that as a part of the conditionality by the EU.
Thank you. Elsa?
Yeah, because the burden of optimism is on me. No, I'm joking. I'm very much the optimist. That's why I'm in Bosnia. But still, yeah. Is that for me, it's really important because I deeply believe this, and I have witnessed this numerous times. Bosnia and Herzegovina, same as I will include here Croatia, because I also feel we work with the environmental movements there. They're not part of the Western Balkans, but they are our closest neighbors. Bosnia and Herzegovina, Croatia, Serbia, Kosovo, Montenegro, Albania, North Macedonia, all of these people living in these countries, but for Bosnia and Herzegovina, I can say the most. These are the countries of people who are very much resilient and really smart, wise, very wise people. These are generations of wise people, and in order for them to understand the process and participate in the process, they really have to be heard. And every process needs to be made according to their needs, not to what someone thinks should be done. And there is so much potential in a sense of that to go over all of these man-made divisions, because environmental struggles and environmental successes prove this more than anything else, that people, when people have united goal to protect the nature, whether that is, source of Una River in Croatia, where all the peoples from the Balkans have joined, or this Vjosa River in Albania, or, Kruščica or Neretvica in Bosnia and Herzegovina, and or any other river in Serbia. So people come and unite around that because why? Because they understand. Whoever understands their connection with the nature and natural goods, they understand it. So if that is possible on this level, it is possible on any level. And I'm sure that people of our region will not allow for us, for our region to, become just a point or where failed tactics are used, and where the lack of rule of law and democratization will be used to exploit the nature. Because we haven't mentioned it, but in many, many cases, the investors who disrupt, exploit the nature and the people are foreigners from the East and the West, without no discrimination. So all of these geopolitical powers are there. But people are resilient and they will prevail, I'm sure.
Thank you. Now, Marjolein, you had some time, or you even get 2 microphones, you get some time to think about what is your final message for our audience?
Yeah, and I also thought about what I wanted to say, which I can use as my
amazing.
Because I also want to make clear that we cannot compare civil society or activism as we know it perhaps in Western Europe to what people are doing in Bosnia, because often there are not like structures to support them. If there are laws, then sometimes mayors or politicians just ignore them. And the examples that Azra named, like all these rivers, Krušica, Una, Neretva, how did they manage to stop the institutions from destroying these rivers is to simply sit on the road, stop the bulldozers that are coming, because that is the only way to do it. Because the normal way, the normal way also sometimes helps. There have also been laws amended, etc. But sometimes this type of activism is needed, and this doesn't fit into the boxes that from the European Union side is would like to implement. This is really grassroots, this is really from the bottom up, and I think I don't know if it's one important factor on how to let Bosnia move forward, I think.
Thank you so much. Thank you all for. If the audience would like to join me in applauding for thank you for the amazing panel. Now some small furniture rearrangements. Wonderful. Is it still on? Yes, lovely. Now, I have the absolute pleasure and the joy to invite with us the final concluding keynote speaker, who is going to, I am sure, take us towards the great realizations we've had today, both looking at the past 30 years, but also looking ahead at the future. So, definitely, without further ado, please welcome together with me His Excellency Henk van Dol, the Dutch Ambassador to Bosnia and Herzegovina.
Thank you, dear ambassadors, dear colleagues, dear friends, dear ladies and gentlemen, dear organizers, let me first thank you for organizing this, this important conference. And thank you for having me, which is a pleasure and an honor. I think I should start with an apology. With all the collective experience and wisdom that was shared with us from both panels, it is quite a challenge to say something new or creative. And also, even if there may be many things to say, you will appreciate that in my position there are also many things not to say. Added to that, I'm very much aware that I'm standing in between you and your lunch. So I will try to make this brief. I wanted to share with you 6 reflections or observations, however you might want to call it. Not necessarily new, some of them perhaps even repetitive of a number of things that we heard this morning. Some of the speakers will recognize their words, almost literally. Not necessarily very profound, definitely not exhaustive, but reflections, I think they may be useful to put things into perspective, to give us food for further reflection and thought. Also, for those of you who are following Dutch politics, you will be aware that the new buzzword is a positive agenda. So I will try to frame some of these observations in a positive agenda, perhaps even incorporating some recommendations for BIH, for the international community, and for the Netherlands. 1. Dayton. I think it is important to see the Dayton Peace Agreement in the proper context and to look once again at its objectives. Dayton was, as we know, not the first attempt of the international community at brokering a peace deal. There was the Cutulero-Carrington Plan, there was the Vance-Owen Plan, there was the Owen-Stoltenberg Plan. All of these plans failed miserably. And let's be honest, Dayton would have failed equally miserably if it wasn't for the simple fact that the Americans backed it up with massive military intervention, that there was a decent amount of arm twisting going on, and obviously that there was an American president who needed a foreign policy success. The result was a deal that made none of the 3 leaders, Milosevic, Tudjman, Izetbegovic, happy. But it did stop the war. And that was precisely the objective. The aim was not to divide the country in entities or to define an intricate balance between so-called constituent peoples. Those were merely the means to an end. I believe it was Richard Holbrooke himself who pointed out that his book is aptly called To End a War, not To Build a State. The Dayton Peace Agreement brought an end to 4 years of massive killing, incomprehensible cruelty, and immeasurable suffering. That achievement is no less valuable now than it was 30 years ago. Two, the Constitution. The legacy of Dayton is a country with, to say it bluntly, a flawed constitutional setup. 2 entities, 1 district, 3 presidents, 14 prime ministers, 180 ministers, 700 members of parliament. in a country of 3 million people. It was clear from the beginning that this would be a temporary arrangement. Also to Richard Holbrooke himself, it was he who said, live with this for 10 years and then try to see where it leads. During the first years, some amendments were made to improve the functionality. And there were some genuine attempts to look at constitutional change, with active international involvement, including a very active High Representative. All of this, and it was mentioned before, culminating in the April package of 2006. The April package failed by a 2-vote margin. Let that sink in. That is almost 20 years ago. Since then, no serious movement in the realm of constitutional change has been made, although the need for it is becoming more and more apparent. It is clear, with or without Kovacevic, I say to Yasmin, that with the current constitutional setup, which is based on ethnic division, which denies the democratic rights of groups of citizens, and which continues to require international supervision and an international peacekeeping mission, BiH cannot become a member of the European Union. I would argue that in parallel with EU accession talks, which can start once the remaining necessary steps have been taken, serious talks on constitutional change have to resume. Perhaps not at the beginning of the process, but definitely not at the end. And perhaps with participation of politicians, but driven by citizens, universities, and constitutional experts. 3. I'm going to 6, you remember. Politics. It is fair to say that because of the constitutional setup of the country, the politics based on ethnicity that caused the war have also shaped the peace. It is easy and tempting to put the blame for the persisting deadlock and instability on Milorad Dodik and his entourage. But one should always remember that also Milorad Dodik is essentially a product of the system. A system that rewards ethno-religious nationalist rhetoric, encourages historical revisionism, and leads to patronage and forms of corruption and state capture. All of which, I must stress that, is by no means the exclusive domain of the SNSD leadership. As a consequence, political campaigning and the political discourse at the national level are primarily about power, about them versus us. They are not about the long waiting lists at the medical centers and the unavailability of essential medicines. They are not about the many days that people in Sarajevo are warned not to breathe outside because of the disastrous air quality. They are not about the education system, which is still partly organized in ethnical bubbles, sometimes, as we know, under one roof. In short, they are not about issues and themes that impact the everyday lives of citizens. 4, institutions. As unfortunately we learned from many countries in the world, democracy cannot be taken for granted. Like any house, it needs care, maintenance, and the occasional renovation. But most of all, it needs a solid construction. The solidity of a democracy is guaranteed by independent, professional, reliable, and predictable institutions. The judiciary, courts, magistrates, prosecutors, the central bank, the police, a central election commission, a cadastre, a land registry, many more. BIH has these institutions. Some of them are strong and resilient, the central bank. But some others are under attack and run the risk of getting entangled in the politics of ethnicity. We consider it crucial to defend the integrity of state-level institutions, to help them when needed to develop their capacities and to boost their confidence in implementing their tasks. I'm proud that the Netherlands, like other partners, is doing exactly that. Through our constituency program, we're working closely together with the central bank. We're also working with the different branches of the judiciary, as well as in a regional setting with the cadastre. And we intend to keep on doing that. 5, citizens. In 2013, BIH had 3.5 million inhabitants. Now, according to reliable estimates, the number has dropped to below 3 million. In this tempo, by 2050, BIH will be a country with less than 2 million inhabitants. For a large part, this is due to the fact that many young people are leaving the country. Many of them because they have the feeling that in today's BIH, there is no future for them or for their children. Imagine what this means for the prospects of economic development for BIH. Imagine how a changed demographic fabric will, for example, burden the healthcare system of the country. We consider it of vital importance that this trend be reversed. That is first and foremost the responsibility of domestic actors, political forces and citizens themselves alike. But we, like many other international partners, stand ready to assist. I see 3 avenues. A, restore the confidence in elections. In that respect, efforts are underway. In the run-up to last year's local elections, High Representative Schmid imposed an election integrity package. It has been mentioned before. Results of that package are promising. It is vital that these and similar measures are rolled out in the entire country in time for the general elections of 2026. Also, it is vital to seriously review the voters list. The voters list of BIH contains 3.4 million names, a remarkable figure in a country with less than 3 million inhabitants, including children. B, fight disinformation and vigorously defend and promote free speech and independent journalism. And C, counter the continuous shrinking of civic space and actively and visibly support civil society and NGOs. And once again, I'm proud that the Netherlands is doing exactly that. Through our assistance programs, through our advocacy, through promoting regional approaches. And finally, 6, the EU. I've been working on enlargement issues for over 20 years, in Central Europe and in the Western Balkans. During that whole period, even under different governments, the Netherlands has consistently held the position that accession to our union, a union of values, has to be a merit-based process. In order to make sure that enlargement makes the union stronger and not weaker, candidate countries have to go through a series of real, sustainable, and sometimes painful reforms. Unfortunately, in recent years, that principled position has not always been popular in Brussels. We have often seen that the yearly country reports by the Commission, not only on BIH, have been overly positive and optimistic, even in the absence of real tangible progress on the ground. This has led some of the candidates to believe that even in the absence of real reform, bars would eventually be lowered. The good news is that that seems to be changing. The latest progress report on BIH, issued recently, is brutally honest on the lack of progress in BIH since the Council in 2024 gave the green light for opening accession negotiations. And also Commissioner Kos is very clear. There will be no shortcuts. Let's hope that this message is clearly understood in BIH. The trains from Podgorica, Tirana, Chisinau, and Kiev are at full speed. It is time for the train from Sarajevo to finally leave the station. Thank you very much.
Thank you. Before sending you off to a well-deserved lunch just outside, I would like to invite the co-organizers, so Estelle, Alden, Sheila, Sanja, Wouter, as well as all of our panelists and keynote speakers, to join me here up front for one final last of applause. So, if you could please all come to the front. One final applause, just to round up the day. Here, Mr. Your Excellency from the Bosnia, please also join us in the front. Yes.
And a picture, I hope.
Yes, and a picture, of course. Thank you all, both the audience here in person as well as online, for joining us for today. So please, to round up the day, one final last. All right.
Let's have lunch.
Let's have lunch, indeed.
That's our reward.
But the panel speakers, please don't leave yet.